I have that at 7 o'clock. We'll call this meeting to order. Be it resolved that the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County, Virginia hereby enter into a closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the following. Section 2.2-3711. 1. Discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of any public body. 1. Economic Development Commission. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Chakowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs? Ms. DeMotts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone? Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Into closed session. To come out of closed meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Chakowski?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Certification of closed meeting. Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to the affirmative recorded vote in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Whereas Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County, Virginia hereby certifies that to the best of each knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification resolution applies. And 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion conveying the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the board. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Chakowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
All right. This time, I'd like to ask our County Administrator, Mr. Meadows, if he would lead us in a moment of silence in the Pledge of Allegiance.
If you're able, please rise with me for a moment of silence, and then I'll lead us in the pledge. Let us pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
All right, first up, public hearing, special use permit, Indigo Road Investments, Rubble Landfill. Good morning, good evening, Ms. Hopkins.
Good evening, Chair Blevins. Okay, this is for an amendment to an existing special use permit to expand a rubble landfill as defined in county code. You guys probably remember this. It's been before you a couple of times. So it's located in the western portion of the county. You can see this is Radford Road, Route 11, and then this is Walton Road, and the subject property is right in this area. This is the tax map of the property. It's that area. It's the properties, the 3 properties highlighted in yellow. In the past, your request has just been for this one parcel here, identified as 021900. This does include full build out of the property, so it includes all 3 of the parcels. And then this is the aerial view. You can somewhat see the valleys here. We do have some drone footage that you can see it a little better in some of those locations. So the subject parcels are actually a portion of 9 contiguous parcels owned by the owner. 3 of those are split zoned, and they are currently zoned manufacturing M1. That was done back in the 80s to allow an automobile graveyard or junkyard. That use has since been discontinued, and there is an approved site plan to have a recycling center, which is a by right use in that zoning district. Basically, they recycle currently clean dirt, concrete, brick, block, things like that. Shell, people can come and pick it up there if they need it for other projects. So this is just some footage we took with the drone. There happened to be 2 trucks there picking up some dirt the day we were there. This is recycling portion, not the inert fill portion. They were actually there picking up the dirt to take it off site. This is the current approved special use permit for the fill area. Again, this is drone footage that we took right when I had gotten there. There was a truck that was leaving that had just dumped, and so you can see the dozer pulling it down the hill to smooth it out. This is another view looking up the valley, so they do still have quite a bit of fill work to do on this site. And then this is an overall, this is the area that was being smoothed out by the dozer. You can see the trucks here that were getting filled up with dirt. And then this is the remaining fill area with the stormwater down here at the end. So the SUP for the rubble landfill was approved on May 24th, 2021. It was 4 acres of inert field. The Planning Commission did recommend denial. The Board of Supervisors approved it by a 6-to-1 vote with conditions. In February 2022, the applicant requested to amend the SUP to add 3 additional acres for a total of 7 acres. The Planning Commission recommended approval by a 7-0 vote. The Board of Supervisors denied the SUP amendment by a vote of 3 to 1 with 1 abstention. And then there were still questions surrounding the full development of the property, how many times they would be back for additional sites, and then traffic concerns on Walton Road were discussed. So an application was accepted by the zoning administrator for an additional special use permit. Our ordinance states that within 1 year of denial, you cannot submit a substantially similar application. So we did determine that this one was different. It does show the full build out of the property, so it did address some of those concerns. The portion that they had requested would be phase 4 here, which would be the last phase that they would develop. So this does define anything that they would do with the property in the future. This is a phasing plan that they submitted. You can see phase 1 here hatched. That's the one they have approval for. Phase 2 consists of several subphases, and the reason is the way they have to do this is access. So they can access part of it, fill it, and then they have to fill backwards from there. You will see some overlap here in phase 2G, and that's basically because to get everything on the same level, they'll have to go back in and do some fill to make it all even. These are the drone footage. You can see phase 4 here, and this is phase 2F. The existing site is over here, just beyond this ridge. And then this is another view of 2F and 2G, and this is the top of 2D in that subphasing. This is the double wide that's the closest to the inert fill site. It's the one that you could see previously in the pictures if you were standing here in a leaf off condition. So the site will utilize the existing entrance that services the recycling center. No access to Spalding Road is proposed, and each phase of the proposed project will be closed prior to opening the next phase. So that means they have to completely fill one phase and subphase before they can open the next. That does reduce the number of trucks entering and leaving the property because they won't have multiple fill sites going on at one time. So per VDOT, the average daily trip counts for this portion of the road is 1,600 trips per day. An entrance permit for the recycling center was issued by VDOT, and that entrance has been installed and is being utilized currently. Citizens have expressed concerns regarding truck traffic on Walton Road, and staff did obtain some VDOT crash data because that was one of the concerns at the last public hearing that you held on this. So between 2016 and 2022, the total Walton Road, and that is from Radford Road to Pippers Ferry, there were 43 accidents between 2016 and 2022. In this section, which is 0.26 miles, 6 of those occurred there. And the site was opened in 2020. So you can kind of see the chart here. There were 2 accidents in 2020 and 1 in 2021. This is the cause of the crash: weather-related failure to maintain control, following too close. And then the type of vehicle that was involved, the majority were pickup trucks or SUVs and passenger vehicles. There was 1 church van that was noted. There were no commercial vehicles involved in any of those accidents. So the subject property does not lie in a FEMA-designated flood zone. In addition, these additional areas do not have any jurisdictional waterways or wetlands. The previously approved volume of fill was 55,000 cubic yards. If this would be approved, this would increase it to 1 million cubic yards. The applicant has indicated that the site could be operational for up to 40 years. A lot of that is based on economy. The more construction you have going on, the quicker it's going to fill up. The less construction you have going on, the longer it's going to take. So no vegetation is proposed for removal within the fill area except for those sections for extensions of the access road. In addition, this is different from the previous request. Trees will be planted as part of the reclamation process, including phase 1. And you'll see some things in blue here. This is wording that has been added since the Planning Commission meeting after some discussion with the applicant and owner. So this does allow the fill areas to be returned to the existing forested use. The site plan indicating limits of disturbance will be required prior to any permitting. And then in addition to meeting all ENS and stormwater requirements, an annual audit is required. Site has been in compliance with all inspections to date. Fill operations will only take place during daylight hours. They'll be limited to 7 to 6 p.m. Phase 2 of the additional proposed fill area is the closest to the existing single-family residential dwellings located along Spalding Road. The applicant does propose to maintain a 75 to 100 foot vegetative buffer around the entire fill site, and then they also have the 43 acres that they're prepared to conserve. The topography and buffer area will aid to obscure the property from the single-family residences. So the majority of fill operations will occur further from the residences. However, noise from equipment and trucks may be experienced. Based on my operations, the noise is kind of similar to running a tractor. That's what the backhoe sounded like as it was pulling the dirt down. The other noise that was heard was the beeping of the trucks as they were backing up. A lot of that, the two that I heard though, were related to the recycling center, not the inert fill site. So the applicant has proposed approximately 45.3 acres of conserved open space on the site. This provides additional open space or landscaping to the buffer, but it's also located in an area that it adjoins a conservation easement in an AFD district. And you can see those areas in pink. So this is the conserved open space, and then this area is the buffer that's proposed around the entire site. These valleys would be the areas of fill. This is your comprehensive plan. It's located in an area designated as rural for the small lot and resource stewardship for the two larger properties. So the resource stewardship rural areas of the county have high resource value based on soil types. They're environmentally sensitive due to topography, and they do have unique land characteristics. Rubble landfill with clean fill or inert debris operations, it was not defined or regulated at the time that the comp plan was put into place. The assumption can be made that since those uses are only allowed by special use permit in A1, that it would then be compatible with resource stewardship, as the majority of our A1 property is located within that designated area in the comp plan. So staff recognize the need for clean fill sites in the county. The use supports construction projects occurring throughout the area. I believe the owners have some examples of some of those that have been delivering there lately. It does offer contractors the option for disposal of inert waste, and it fits with the existing recycling center. Many trucks actually enter this site, and they will not only dump the materials, but then, so they may dump dirty dirt, so you could say, that's mixed with concrete or brick or block, but then they may clean up clean dirt to take back to the site to use at the construction site. So a lot of them are using it for the dual purpose of the recycling center and the inert. Only 2 approved sites are in the county. The SUP for phase 1 of this property, and then there is another site that's located right outside the town boundary with Christiansburg. It is important to mitigate the impacts to the surrounding owners, and we do have section 1048-4 of the county code that has additional regulations that must be complied with. So I'll just outline those real quickly. Minimum lot size shall be 10 acres. It shall be in accord with all Commonwealth of Virginia, including any special conditions. The DEQ has issued all necessary permits for the current site, and the site is in compliance. Screening of the site shall be sufficient to ensure minimal visual impact They have indicated that they will put the buffer area around. It should be noted that that buffer area is in excess of what is required in the zoning ordinance. A master plan shall be submitted for consideration, specify all changes and improvements. A site plan has been approved for phase 1 currently. It is in conformance, and the proposed expansion area would need to be defined in a field revision plan that would go basically through the same review as a site plan. We would also require the reclamation plan at that time showing the replanting of the forest. An annual environmental audit will be required, and then the board may set additional standards. So some of those were the access road to the current fill site has been constructed and is being utilized. It is constructed with an all-weather surface. The applicant has complied with the required hours of operation for the inert fill site and the buffer requirements. We have not received any complaints regarding the noise at the site. Hours of operation were approved by SUP from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. It should be noted those hours of operation do not apply to the manufacturing portion of the property being used for the recycling center. So that is a by right use that does not have any conditions on it. So you might have trucks entering and leaving the property outside of those hours because they are using the recycling portion of the property. The definition of rubble landfill, clean earth fill, brick, block, concrete, that all has appeared to be in compliance with all of our inspections to date. Staff recognizes that the existing by right use on the manufacturing portion of the property generates greater impacts since there are no conditions. So the truck traffic is generated by this use, no limitations on hours or the numbers. There are no additional buffering requirements for that M1 zoning district. It just has to meet the ordinance requirements. Other by right uses in the M1 district could be more impactful, and I've listed some of those out there. Truck terminal, manufacturing plants, public garages, truck repairing, that type of thing. Those would all be by right uses with an approved site plan. So the concern remains regarding the length of time for the operation and the noise generated by the fill site. Length of time could be anywhere depending on the economic conditions, and there is no way to really narrow that down. Some of the impacts can be mitigated by conditions and through proposed phasing of the project. No additional entrances or accesses are proposed. Roads will be constructed utilizing recycled materials and will be internal to the site. Those will be constructed as phases are developed. So they will build a road to get to the phase and then build a road to get to the next phase. They won't put all the roads in at one time. Each phase will be closed out, reclaimed, and planted for forested use before moving on to additional phases. That does include phase 1. That is currently being filled. Phase 2 of the plan has been broken into subphases. Environmental services will continue to routinely inspect the fill site. John Burke visits this site approximately every other week, so he's out there about every 2 weeks. Current inspections of the site show its continued compliance. Staff recently visited the site as stated, and we did observe the one dump truck exiting after dumping, and 2 actually came onto the site to remove clean dirt. So at the Planning Commission public hearing, we had 8 members of the public spoke. They spoke in concerns to traffic and noise. The Planning Commission did recommend denial of the special use permit by a 6-2 to 1 vote. Mr. Rice did abstain. During the meeting, it was brought to his attention that one of his properties may be receiving fill from the site. He was not aware of that, but to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest, he abstained, and I believe he has sent everyone a notice describing what occurred there. So since the hearing, the applicant and staff have discussed additional conditions if their requests were considered for approval, so I just wanted to go through those. The first is pretty standard, and anything in blue has changed since the Planning Commission. So the concept layout, we generally put this on all of our conditions. It shall be in substantial conformance with the site concept map and phase 2 construction plan prepared by Foresight, dated 10/28/22. A final inspection for each phase and or subphase shall be completed prior to the placement of fill in the next phase as identified on the phase 2 construction plan. Trees and native plants shall be planted upon completion of each phase and/or subphase as possible. And the reason the as possible is in there is that phase 2E, F, and G, because they overlap, there will be a little area there that they can't fill until they complete phase 2F or 2G. A replanting plan shall be submitted with the stormwater site plans for each phase. Planting should occur within 3 months of the phase and/or subphase final inspection, or at the beginning of June if the phase or subphase is completed. So if they have a final inspection that occurs in December, it's not planting season. Anything they plant's not going to live. So we didn't want to ask them to plant outside of a planting season and not have everything come to fruition. Undirt fill areas may not be used for any development in the future and shall remain as forested area. All boundaries of the approved fill area shall be adequately marked on the property, including the property line between the proposed fill area and the property under the same ownership, which is zoned RR, and remain in place through the time of the rubble landfill is operational. That is a carryover from the first special use permit that was approved back in May of 21. Other than for direct access by vehicles bringing fill to the site, the northern and northwestern perimeter boundary of the fill areas shall maintain a minimum 75 feet on all sides with the vegetation equivalent to a type 4. This buffer requirement may be accomplished with existing vegetation, new evergreens. Again, this is a carryover from the previous special use permit, and they did plant those evergreens. They have been inspected. Revegetation of all perimeter buffer areas is required if the buffer is disturbed. That is also a carryover. The access road shall be maintained in passable condition at all times. The access road shall be constructed with all-weather surface material and maintained to prevent dust. This is a carryover from the first one. No access to parcel 021900 is permitted from Spalding Road. All permits from other agencies must be provided. Hours of operation shall not exceed 7 to 6, Monday through Saturday. And then this last one was added since the Planning Commission public hearing. We heard a lot about people that would leave the site and take a right. And they would either go out Spalding Road and down Switchback, or they would go to Pepper's Ferry all the way through Walton. So we discussed how we could address that, and they recommended a condition that the applicant shall place and maintain a sign where trucks exit the site that is readable by the driving public that truck traffic is to turn left to access Radford Road. The applicant shall also notify all customers that use the site in writing that truck traffic is to turn left to access Radford Road, since it is only 0.26 miles from Route 11. Adjoining property owners were notified. We did place signs on the property and ran legal ads. 4 inquiries have been received by staff. 2 of those were prior to the Planning Commission public hearing and 2 were after. We may have others here that are prepared to speak tonight. And with that, I will take any questions that you have for me. Mr. Neal is here with Foresight Development, and so is Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Ms. Hopkins. We'll go around the room. We'll start off with Supervisor Shepherd.
I only have one question. The Planning Commission approved denial. Is that what that reads?
The Planning Commission recommended a denial, yes.
But they voted to
They voted
deny
to
it.
deny the request,
Okay.
yes, to recommend denial.
That's all.
Supervisor Fidzikowski.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Supervisor King.
No questions.
Supervisor DeMott.
Just a couple, and you might not know the answer to this one. Do you know how long Walton Road is? How many miles?
I do not know the total length, no, I am sorry.
Would you be able to find out for me?
Most likely, yes, and Mr. Jesse Miller with VDOT is here tonight, so if I have to, I'll sneak back there and ask him.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question, if this was approved, would Mr. Burke's inspections include compliance inspections with the replanting requirements?
That would be a joint inspection between myself and Mr. Burke, yes.
Okay.
We would.
Thank you.
Supervisor Bone.
Earlier in your presentation, you said that there weren't any complaints about noise, and then a couple slides later, there were complaints about noise. Could you differentiate the two slides?
So people came to the Planning Commission and stated that they had an issue with the noise at the site. We have not received any calls in our department since the site started operation that there were any issues there, noise-wise, vehicle-wise, anything like that. So our department has not received any complaints that we needed to respond to. However, there were concerns regarding noise stated at the Planning Commission meeting.
At the Planning Commission meeting, I believe, or maybe at this meeting, someone of the public said that the banging of the, like when the trucks were dumping and then the back would go bang. Is that common practice? Can that be remedied in any way?
You would have to ask Mr. Phillips. I don't know if that's common practice or not. I can tell you the truck that was there the day I came did not do that, but I don't know that others also do not do that.
Okay. Vice Chair Biggs.
Just one question. You said that if this went through, there would be an annual environmental audit. What does that consist of? What do they look at?
It is something that they have to do through some of their other state permits that they have. For us, we just have to get a copy of it. I don't know what all they look at. The other audit, what we are doing is just looking to make sure they're in compliance with all their other permits and their special use permit that they have. And we also look at Mr. Burke's inspections to ensure that they're complying with everything he's asking.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hopkins, you said 40 years is the possible length of time, an estimate?
That is what the applicant has stated. Basically, it's unknown. If we continue to go at the pace we're going, it might only be 20. If we hit another recession, it could be even longer. It really depends on the demand for fill.
And you've stated in here that the staff recognizes the need. Have you had complaints or people calling, wanting to know where they could dump?
We routinely have situations where people are dumping where they aren't supposed to, and Mr. Burke has to go and stop them. So we do have that happen routinely. The other option, the other legal option for dumping is they would take this to Cloyd's Mountain to the sanitary landfill. That in itself causes a problem because this is clean fill, and if you're putting it in your sanitary landfill and filling it up sooner, then we're going to have an issue where we're going to put a new sanitary landfill sometime in the future. So this does give them an alternative to that from using the sanitary landfill. But we do routinely get complaints about people filling, and there are some people that fill for agricultural operations. That's actually what the other approved site is right outside the town of Christiansburg. Are those type of sites. So they're doing it for what they call agricultural operations to flatten something out for grazed land or hay or something like that. By right, you can do 15,000 cubic yards of fill in our ordinance. So if you have a portion of your yard that you want to flatten out, you can do up to 15,000 cubic yards by right without a special use permit. And we do have several places that do that very frequently.
And you said that it is common for you to get calls on illegal dumping?
Yes, very common.
Okay, very good. Any other follow-up questions? Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, we will open up the public hearing. I have a sign-up sheet. I will call the names on the sign-up sheet. Each citizen has 4 minutes to address the board. If you'll state your name and address, the 1-minute warning will be a yellow light. And then after the names of any other citizens, I'm sorry?
Can the applicant speak?
Oh, absolutely. If the applicant, well, of course, the applicant can come forward first. I didn't see this pop up yet.
No worries.
That's all right. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I appreciate your time this evening. My name is John Neal. I'm an engineer with Foresight Design. And also Bobby Phillips, is the owner of the property, is here as well. I want to give you a little presentation on what we're proposing. Talk a little bit about the location of the site, which is very, very important, as well as the adjacent zoning that's right beside this site. then talk a little bit about our overall proposed SUP amendment that we're proposing tonight, the previous conditions of the site, and then last but not least, traffic safety and the data that is available and that you can utilize in your decision making. First and foremost, the location is very important. The green star there is our site. You can see that there. The yellow star is the agricultural site that Bree mentioned that is permitted. That's the Baker Field site. It's about a little over half a mile off of Route 11. So we're off of Route 11 as well. And one thing to keep in mind, our site from the town of Blacksburg, from downtown Blacksburg, we're 19 minutes away. Town of Christiansburg is 9 minutes away to our site, and the city of Radford is 11 minutes away. And one of the things to keep in mind is Cloyd's Mountain is more than double that distance away and out of the county. So when a truck is traveling to us from the major development areas, which are the town of Blacksburg, town of Christiansburg, and city of Radford, we're cutting down all that wear and tear in those trucks on the road by half that time limit. And that's critically important to keep in mind. And the Baker Field site, as I mentioned, it is relatively close by. It's just outside the town limits of Christiansburg, over by Sheeler Motor Mile and Hubble Electric. And here's a picture from Google Earth Street View that's looking. The Baker Field site is behind this picture. That's right at the entrance to it. And that's the street, that's Rainbow Street in Christiansburg coming up to it, just to give you an idea where that's at, in Village Lane, which is bisecting that. Keep in mind, as I said, this proposed SUP amendment and our existing SUP that already exists is adjacent to a major collector road. Walton is considered a major collector. And we're a quarter of a mile from a principal arterial, Route 11. And we're co-located adjacent to M1 manufacturing land. So if there is a location for this site, we truly believe this is where it's at. The New River Recycling site is on the M1 manufacturing land. Mr. Phillips operates that as well. This just gives you a little, you can see the blue there is kind of the metro, for lack of a better word, the metro area of Blacksburg, Christiansburg, and Radford. And our green star there is where we're at. The purple, as you can see there, is going across, is Walton Road and going up to Pepper's Ferry on the top, and then Route 11, which is the red line, just right there kind of touching our star. The zoning, going on to the adjacent zoning. The New River Recycling site is operating and is continuing to develop in that M1 land that you see there. Walton Road is the little yellow line here that's going up and down the page on the left-hand side. And this is a view of the site plan for New River Recycling. That site continues to develop, and we're adding buildings and construction there. And that's where you see, I know there's been some questions and concerns about the amount of equipment operating and trucks and things like that. The New River Recycling site has most of the equipment and trucks coming to it and leaving as well. We recycle some materials there, and you can see that's all the yellow property right there. And the M1 land is the kind of the stuff that's a little bit lighter in color, and that's the yellow as well there. That's where the New River Recycling site is at. And then the existing SUP is kind of the purplish area over there, and that crosshatched area is our Phase 1 area that was approved by you all a couple of years ago as a SUP. One of the things that was asked of us when we first did this was, well, what's your overall plan, or when are you going to keep coming back for them? And that's one of the things that we tried to address with this application is this is it. This is the last time we're coming back for an SUP on this 224 acres. And that's where you can see where we're proposing to amend the SUP. We have Phase 1, which is the existing SUP. And then Phase 2 is where we show kind of the phasing, the sub-phasing of that, and then Phase 3 and Phase 4. And this shows, I think Bree showed you this, this is the overall 224 acres, not counting the New River Recycling site. This is just the 224 acres for the SUP, as well as the conserved open space that we're proposing there. And this is what we talked about and what we saw in the conditions that are proposed by staff and that we completely agree with, is that Each of these subphases, handling about 4 acres, right at 4 acres of property, will be developed, filled, and then stabilized and replanted in trees prior to moving on to the next phase. So keep that area small, and we keep it minimized for the trucks that are coming into it. And I did want to show there's been talk of the topography and how it relates to some of the adjacent properties and things like that. I wanted to show you a little bit of a profile, and this is from Google Earth. You can see this is kind of about halfway along Spalding Road. And I took a profile all the way across where our phase 2 and phase 3 are. So Spalding Road up there where the little red mark is, that's at elevation 2132. Phase 2F, which is, I think you can see this, right in this area right here, is at actually elevation 2080. So that's about 50 feet below. But the thing to keep in mind, that phase 2F 2080 is right here. We also have a high point that is on the wooded area between most of Spalding Road and this area that's well above the 2132 that Spalding Road's sitting at. And then phase 2E and 2G, which is right here, right in this area, is down at 2050, which is in this low area right here. And then phase 3, farther into the future than I can see, is right over here. And that's down that's at 2080 as well, which is right in here. So those are some things to keep in mind. Also, just to give you an idea, the intersection of Spalding Road and Walton Road, the intersection is at elevation 2040. And the high point, so 2040 is all the way over here to the left. The high point, which is actually right here on the New River Recycling and right on the border of those properties, is at 2150. So almost a little over 100 feet higher in elevation than the intersection of the roads. And then phase 2 here, it varies between 1920 and 2130, and that would be filled over in this area here. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a visual representation of the type of topography that we're dealing with. And these fills that we're proposing are going down into the valleys and in the holes on this 224 acre property. So keep in mind that the existing access that exists for New River Recycling is what we'll be using for this fill site, what we use for the original SUP. And this is not a rezoning, but a special use permit, and we're specifically called out in the zoning ordinance that a clean earth fill site is allowed by an SUP over 15,000 cubic yards in this zoning district. And we're utilizing less than 45 acres of this, 244 acre property. And we're dedicating more than 45 acres of conserved open space on the property. And we'll be using about 4 acres at a time of that overall 244 acre property. So about 4 acres at a time is the only part of the property that would be denuded and with trees and an active fill operation going on at that time. And reforestation, planting trees after the fill is completed on each subphase. And the New River Recycling site is separate from the proposed inert fill site, but we're going to utilize the same entrance. And as Bree mentioned to you and the staff saw at their site visit, those things are very much symbiotic in that folks coming from a construction site throughout the New River Valley where they have tore down a building or something like that, and they'll drop off inert fill that might get recycled. And Bobby Phillips can speak to that. So a lot of the recycling that he has done from some of these construction sites, or if they have found bad material that they cannot use to put fill back in on the construction site that they're working on, they can bring it up here, dump it off, and then pick up material that they can take back to that same site and use to compact to build footers on or build buildings on. So that's the key thing that really happens on this site and makes it ideal because we are providing good fill material to go back to that construction site where they dropped off possibly poor fill material. And that's what I said here, the shared ownership helps out as well. And this site is only for inert fill as defined by the county. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that the approval of this site will preserve precious space in the New River Valley existing landfill, Cloyd's Mountain, that should not be taken up by inert debris. We want that landfill on Cloyd's Mountain to last as long as humanly possible. And I would hope that the county wants that as well. And in 2022, the New River Recycling Site has recycled 17,400 tons of concrete, 215 tons of steel, and 1,400 tons of asphalt. That's the New River Recycling Site that's right beside us there. So some of y'all may or may not remember, I know we showed this back when we got the original SUP approved, but it still bears repeating. Mr. Phillips has cleaned up this existing site. It was an old automobile graveyard, and so there were tons of tires and scrap and vehicles and things like that. He completely cleaned it up when he purchased the property. So last but not least, I want to make sure I know one of the big concerns has been traffic and traffic safety and those types of things. And so I mentioned at the beginning of this that I want to talk to you about the data because that's important. If you are concerned about safety, the best way to do that is to look at the data and what's provided and what actually happens. So this is the VDOT crash map. They provided, anybody can go and take a look at it online. You can see Blacksburg kind of up here, right there, and you can see the roads. And then here's Christiansburg. You can almost see the outline of the towns, in the city. You can see where most of those crashes are happening. But we also have Peppers Ferry Road, which is right here. I think hopefully y'all can see that. And then we have Route 11, which is right here. And then we have Interstate 81, which is right here. Now, this is a compilation of all the crashes from 2015 to 2022. So that's 8 years, I think it is. And then you see the legend over here of the different types of injuries. Some of them are property damage, and then some of them, unfortunately, were fatal injuries. So we'll zoom in just a little bit closer, keeping in mind what we're looking at. Here's Walton Road. I zoomed in at Walton Road a little bit. You can see Vicar over here to the right. You still see the massive amount of, and each one of these little circles represents a crash, an incident. So you can see all of those along Peppers Ferry Road and Route 11, and then you see some here. And this is over the entire 2015 to 2022 crash data. And so we'll get a little bit closer, and we're going to look at 2021. So this is 2021. I think our fill site was approved in 2020, Bree said. So this would be when the fill site was operating, as well as when New River Recycling was operating. And so we had a couple of crashes right here, and a couple along here, and going there. And that is the 2021 data. You can see there are a few visible injuries, and then several property damage only crashes. And then I look at 2022. So this is 2022, the full calendar year of 2022. There were 2 crashes on Walton Road. There was one right up here at this curve, and that was a property damage only, passenger car, male, 44 years old. Then this one right here, kind of halfway along Walton. Here is where Spalding cuts off, right there. And that was property damage, passenger car. They have a note exceeded the speed limit, and that was a 19-year-old female. And you can see in 2022, I want to point out, you can still see the substantial number of crashes along Peppers Ferry Road and Radford Road, Route 11. And obviously, one of those things is the volume of traffic, of course. And also, the other thing that contributes to a lot of that is the speed. The slower you go, the less likely you are to have an accident. And then here's the Montgomery County crash data for 2022, just to kind of give you the overview of the overall county. In 2022 in Montgomery County, there were 516 crashes overall. And in 2022 on Walton Road, there were 2. And then just to give you a little bit, this is the overall crashes from 2015 to 2022 on Walton Road from Peppers Ferry Road to Route 11. There were 54 crashes. That's over the entire life of that 8 years. So we're averaging maybe 6-ish, right in that neighborhood. And Mr. Mont, you asked 4.13 miles is how long that stretch of road is. And then I apologize here. So there was 54 on the northbound for that entire length of time on those 8 years, and there were 43 southbound. So there were a total of 97 over those 8 years. That's my right at a little over 10. So on Route 8, just to give you some perspective and thought process, from 2015 to 22 on Route 8, there were 460 crashes. And I think speed is probably one of your contributing factors there, most likely, as well as traffic. So I wanted to run through that data because I think that is critically important in your decision making is thinking about what the actual data tells you and where we're at, as well as the need for this use and the operator. So be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Any supervisors have any questions? You do? Supervisor Bone.
Could you go back to the southbound and northbound numbers, please?
Oops. Yep.
So where does that say southbound versus northbound? Oh, I see.
Oh, so on the
Northbound and
bottom right-hand corner, that's the northbound. And then there's the southbound. So this is from 2015 to 2022. So there were 13 that were non-right-of-way crashes, and then 30 that were road departure. So in other words, if they did not leave the right-of-way or they left the right-of-way crashes.
So southbound, there, obviously 2019, 2020, 2021 was remarkably different than earlier years. If you go northbound, it's opposite. You can't tell. One of your maps only shows one incident between Radford Road and the entrance.
Yeah, so right here.
The yellow.
Yep, that yellow right there.
But you don't know if that's north or southbound.
I do not on this. No, I could dig into it and find out.
It's okay. How many trucks per day go in and out? Well within what you estimated, or right on target, or more?
I maybe ask Bobby to come up if he doesn't mind. He can probably speak to that on a day-to-day operations thing better than I can.
It really depends on the job going on. Like, we have a job going on across from Chick-fil-A right now, and we had 160 loads of dirt come in and 160 go out. But,
Over what period of time?
3-week period. But we have different jobs going on at Virginia Tech, and there's different jobs everywhere. And, of course, this time of year, the dirt is unsuitable because once it gets wet, you have to wait till spring of the year for it to dry out. They can't hold the job up that long, so they bring the unsuitable to us. We pile it up, and then we reuse it again, and then they take shell back because the shell is dry because we're naturally digging it up. So they're taking it back to the job site at that point.
So I don't recall how many the original proposal was truck trips per day. Do you remember?
I think we were probably like 6 to 10 is what I'm
6 to
guessing
10.
per day is what I think.
So you said 130 trips
Probably about
over 3
10.
weeks?
Yeah, over 18 days.
Okay. What are you doing to make sure that the trucks dump in the right places?
Well, we have an on-site supervisor on the job, and we have, he determines where the loads go. But if it's concrete, it stays down on the M1 side. And if it's dirt, it goes up to the fill site. But we have people at both locations, the top and bottom. So there's somebody monitoring it all the time.
But some trucks dump in the wrong places. Isn't that what I heard earlier, or no? No? Okay, I apologize, I
Well, there's,
misunderstood.
I think in some of the potential illegal sites throughout the county,
I
somebody
see
may-
what you're
may
saying.
done that.
Okay, thank you. And is there anything that you can do about the backs of the dump trucks slamming their back doors?
Most of your trucks in today's world all have airlift tailgates, where when the tailgate opens, it raises up, so the stuff don't get hung in it. So when they come back down, there's no, it just comes down, and it's very soft.
Gotcha.
But there is a,
There's
there
gonna
is
be
a
some.
random truck that is not up to today's standards.
You're
of
gonna have
course.
some trucks coming there that people don't have as good equipment as J.C. Martin and all the other people have. You know, that's hard to control that. I mean, but it's not gonna be an everyday occurrence.
Getting back to the other question about how many trips per day, you had that 130 trips over 18 days, but then you had all other business too on top of that.
Well,
So
it really depends. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people don't work when it rains
do
or
you
something.
limit the number of trucks that can come in to the upper limit that you expected it to be, or you just let everybody come in whenever,
Well, there,
however many times?
there's kind of a physical limit of a truck by the time it comes into the site as it drives through and goes up and dumps, and then they gotta unload it, and then they actually come down and they maybe put shale on it and load it up. You can only service so many trucks over a time period. So as far as exactly what that would be, I don't know how efficient Joe can get in that.
Well, generally, like, they're going over here where they're building the Bojangles at in Christiansburg. It's gonna take them an hour round trip per truck. So, you know, that, and most of your contractors are gonna they'll have 3 or 4 trucks running. And so it's gonna be at least an hour per truck.
How often would you have more than 10 trucks a day?
That's a hard question to answer because
5% of the time? 10% of the time?
probably 5% of the time. It's just not gonna be that often.
That's all I have, thank you.
Anyone else?
And
Follow up?
if I may mention one more thing, there was a question about environmental stuff. We worked on our phase 1 site with our environmental consultant, Tom Leadham, who used to work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and went through all that permitting process and purchased the credits that we do. And we'll do that exact same thing for this site as well. And we would have Tom come back to assist with our environmental audit, as well as John Burke is really your key with the county, making sure everything is squared away as far as permits and everything. That answers your question, Ms. Biggs.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Neal, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll open it up for public hearing. First name I have is Robert McLeod.
That is not what I wanted to do. Okay, Jen, I may need your help. There we go. Yeah. He has a presentation. Oh, does he have a presentation? Sorry.
I didn't know that was the first one. You can just advance with this.
While she's getting that set up, I'll just do a reminder. Each citizen will have 4 minutes for the public hearing. One, if you'll state your name and address, then when the light starts flashing, that's your 1-minute warning. Thank you.
Yes, my name's Robert McLeod. I live at 746 Switchback Road in Christiansburg. And on December 22nd, I was here at the meeting, and I did say that we had several trucks, about, I believe it was about 25 going, that I counted back and forth. And the distance that they were going was just a short distance, so it was maybe half hour apiece between that. I also said that there was no weight limit signs on either switchback, which they were using, and I was counting the trucks on switchback. There still is no signs on Switchback Bridge, but there are 3 signs on Walton Road and Spalding Road. Now, they all say it's a 10-ton limit. I don't know what a tractor trailer like I've seen, or not tractor trailer, but a dump truck is, but it's good 10 tons. Now, they're supposed to leave going to the left, coming out of the building, out of the site. They're supposed to do that. I don't know who tells them which roads they're to use coming in. Now, my concern is the safety, and the safety specifically in the corner just up from Route 11, which is the way they're supposed to go out. There's an S-curve there. The sight distance, I will show you. This is an aerial view of that road coming out. The S-curve is where that red line comes and goes to the left there. I don't know how many of you travel that road. I urge you, prior to voting on any project here, go out there, look at the road, take a good view of that road, because it's important. We're talking about safety here. This photograph is a picture going up the hill. That house at the end, they pick up kids at that house at the end with school buses. I checked with Mr. Russell, who is charge of transportation. Their buses run between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. and between 2:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. Both of those are included. This corner, you have no sight distance of the trucks coming out. This photograph was taken in the morning, 7 o'clock. You can see the glaze on the road. It was only wet at that time. I was almost involved in an accident at that point. This is another one of the road, and your distance, you have to be almost to the corner before you can see the vehicles coming toward you. Coming down, you can't see the vehicle. You can't see a vehicle coming up the hill. There's no sight distance. And right at the end of this photograph.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up, Alice Williams. Then after Alice, I'll have a Ken Farah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alice Williams. I live at 2664 Radford Road, which is probably a half a mile from Walton Road entrance off of 11. I don't know why we have to keep revisiting this. If it's voted down, it's voted down, and it's never put to bed. We already know what the community wants. Why do we keep having to revisit the same thing? The same people live there. I haven't moved. The same children are getting on that bus and that S-curve. They haven't moved. Why are we beating a dead horse, so to speak? Trust me, I love horses. But to me, it just doesn't make any sense while we're just spinning our wheels over this same thing. We still don't want it. I'm not moving to get rid of it. The noise is still there. Even I'm on 11. The noise coming down there with the Jake brakes and all that stuff going on, the air brakes going. I had to move an animal that I had back to another farm because it was so loud, the horse was petrified. So I don't understand why we're still doing this. At the same time, what is it the benefit to the community to keep having this project there? There must be some good income from it. So how is that benefiting anybody that's in that area? Walton Road is small, it's dangerous, it's curvy. There are several sections on there that every year, every single year, there's an ice slick that happens in a fairly large distance. So if the road isn't going to get any bigger, the weather's not going to change from what we currently have in this area, what are we going to do to make it better? How can you better fit the community into this? I think everybody's looking at how better to support the folks that want it there, the businesses that are using it, but what can we do to make it better for the community of the people who live there? Several driveways have to have those big mirrors on them so that they can see what traffic is coming left or right. It's dangerous. And as we all know, traffic numbers have escalated over the years. You used to be able to tell how many people lived in the house by how many cars were in front of it. Well, you can definitely tell that now. Everybody has a car. The roads are saturated no matter where we go. Even in the pictures that you could see the sides of the road there, they were full of debris. So even the guttering is not being maintained on those sides. The one family, I'm not sure if they're speaking here tonight, if they were, they have to go out there all the time on their own time and clear this section out because no one else does it. So if they want this landfill system there, what are they going to do for the community? Are they going to pave the road so it's better maintained? Are they going to make these ditches with drainages so that that big truck coming down that big hill doesn't slide on that ice and hit that bus full of children that are going to be there morning and night? We have a lot of elderly people that live on that road. Yes, we all know we're not going to get out of this world alive. So that transition is, as they get older and they move on, their families are still there. I'm going to be getting older in the next 40 years when this thing is proposed. Shoot, I won't even be here. But hopefully my family will be. And are we still going to allow these unsafe conditions to be there? I don't know. Why do we keep going back and forth? I guess because, the people that are there, they want more profit. They want more income from this. And understand, it's got to go somewhere. Absolutely, it's got to go somewhere. But you gave them a site, and all of a sudden now they got to have more. And a lot more, not
Ms.
just
Williams,
what was
thank
there.
you.
Thank you.
Ken Fair. And then up is an Angela Statton.
I'm Ken Farrar, address 1800 White Oak Lane. I'm pastor out at Mount Tabor United Methodist Church, which is 1742 Walton Road. And I've been pastor there not quite 13 years. When we look at this project, I think we spend a lot of time looking at the land suitability, but that's only part of it. We have to look at way more than that. We have to look at the neighborhood, the safety, the roads. All of that is part of the project. My big concern, like these others, are the S-curve coming off of Route 11, heading up and heading down. I go up and down it considerably. We look at those accident reports, but what they don't tell you is the problems that we've had that do not end in an accident. How many times I've had to turn off into Cox's driveway because a truck coming, and they can't stay on one lane. It is impossible. Whether, you can't do it. Bus, truck, whatever. How many times I got to turn into Simpkins' driveway to get out of the way of a truck? I came up the drive not too long ago up Walton Road and got through the first curve, and here come a truck, and I had to back down through an S-curve back into Route 11, staring at the grill of a big dump truck. None of those ended up in wrecks. They're not on your accident report, but they sure get you worried. One of the things I find kind of bothersome, Mr. Phillips hasn't appeared to be working with the neighbors. I've never heard anything. A lot of the neighbors I've talked to have not been contacted by him. And I'm used to working with people. You know, how do we work together to solve a problem? We got a great big sign that says private property at the entrance to the landfill. Well, that in itself is fine, but it's all private property. It's a barrier. A friend of mine tried to fly a drone over there and ended up with a deputy at his door telling him that was illegal because he was trespassing. No, it's not illegal. But what is he hiding? We don't know. I did mention at the last time we were here in April that Todd, you had received donations from Mr. Phillips, and rightfully so. But I believe for voting, you shouldn't, because that does impact, a vote. I asked the same thing for Mr. Rice at the Planning Commission, and he declined to vote, as I think proper. One of the questions I've got, if this is a big problem for the county, why isn't the county doing something? Why are we only looking at this one place? Why don't we look at other places? Why don't we look at old landfills? Why don't we look at quarries? Why don't we work with other jurisdictions? That's what we do with sanitary landfills. Why don't we look for the very best long-term place we can find? And when we find one, maybe hire Mr. Phillips to run the place, because he could probably do a mighty fine job. Thank you.
Sir. Angela Stanton?
Good evening. My name is Angela Stanton, and I live at 2595 Spalding Road on land that adjoins one of the parcels owned by NRB&T, where the extensions for Phase 2B and Phase 3 reside. In the minutes from the April 2021 Planning Commission meeting, it states, and I quote, Mr. Neal noted that Mr. Phillips was in the recycling business and would utilize materials from the inert site where possible for reuse and limiting the materials used for fill. This is diametrically opposed to remarks made by Mr. Phillips at the April Board of Supervisors meeting requesting the initial expansion of the SUP. Supervisor Bond asked what percentage of the materials were recycled. Mr. Phillips said 10% of the materials were recyclable. The current application states that New River Recycling makes tremendous efforts to recycle everything possible, but I'm sorry, having 90% of the material simply being dumped in a landfill is incongruous with the notion of recycling. We were very concerned when this all started with the original SUP in the beginning, and we really believed it was like the nose under the camel under the tent, and our fears have been confirmed. Last April, an application to expand the SUP was denied by this board. Supervisor Biggs expressed concern that the applicant was asking to expand the scope of the project in less than 1 year, and at that time, Mr. Phillips stated the site was close to about half full in less than a year in something that was supposed to be 5. Supervisor Biggs asked the county attorney if Mr. Phillips could apply for another SUP if the application were denied, and she was told he couldn't come back for a year unless the application was substantially different. It's different. We're now looking at expanding the size of the landfill tenfold, spread out across his properties and extending further and further away from the recycling facility. The phases are also not contiguous with the existing SUP area. It's going to require the removal of hundreds of trees and the creation of roads. Additionally, this SUP is for 40 years. That's 2063. If the property that's now the recycling facility had not been rezoned and had SUPs assigned 40 years ago, we wouldn't be dealing with this today. So decisions we make today do matter. And what are the future plans for the uses of the property? We don't know, and we probably won't know because this continues to be a moving target. In April, Supervisor Filzikowski asked if trucks leaving the center travel on Pepper's Ferry from Walton, and Mr. Phillips stated they don't. It's not true. You've heard that tonight. We have seen trucks turning right, and no sign is going to prevent that from occurring. Lastly, members of the Board of Supervisors and community have expressed safety concerns, and I have them as well. Walton Road was not built for the volume or the type of traffic proposed, and neither were Spalding or Switchback. As Supervisor DeMott said in her no vote last April, road safety issues have not been resolved, and they haven't been resolved 9 months later. Making the operation bigger will certainly not help, And I truly hope it doesn't take someone being killed by one of the trucks before the issue's taken seriously. 40 years ago, Montgomery County had a population of around 65,000. Today, it's 101,000, about a 67% increase. We already have far more traffic than what our roads were built for, and if we experience similar growth over the next 40 years, our safety concerns will increase and not decrease. We're in strong opposition to the SUP, and I respectfully request the Board of Supervisors to follow the lead of the Planning Commission and vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Will Stanton. After Will, I have a Barbara Devini.
Well, good evening. My name is Will Stanton, and I live at 2595 Spalding Road in Christiansburg. We built our forever house in 2005 on 78 acres adjacent to the Indigo Hills property. Right next to you could see it on when they were showing where the debris was going to be put. We love it there. We love the serenity. But in the last few months, when I walk my dogs at 7 o'clock in the morning, a little after 7, I hear a clang. It comes like a shot in the dark, and it is the rear tailgate of a dump truck. I grew up in a construction family, and I know what those things sound like because I heard them most of my life growing up. So Mr. Phillips can say the new trucks have ways of silencing that. They come down softly. Well, it must be all the old trucks that are there at 7 o'clock in the morning when I'm walking my dogs because it goes clang. I also hear it throughout the day, not just at 7 o'clock in the morning. You can't stop it, and you're so serenity out there. You're so happy to be outside, and then bang, it just wakes you up instantly. And tonight we're talking about, I think you asked about how many trucks that come in and go out every day. You're voting on the SUP. You're not voting on what they said tonight. The SUP, the proposal said, potential of 30 to 40 trucks per day. That's what is in the proposal. 30 to 40 trucks per day, not 10, not 16, but 30 to 40. That means a truck every 15 to 20 minutes. Now, we've heard about by right that the site that's located as a manufacturing can have trucks, they can have trains, they can have everything out there making noise. Well, the place the debris is going to be placed is an A1. It's not going to be in the manufacturing location, it's an A1. Every site where the debris is going to go is an A1. So I'm worried about the 11 hours a day, 6 days a week for the next 40 years. I'm not going to be here 40 years from now, but I certainly don't want to hear that clang and hear the trucks, the diesel trucks, the excavators, the chainsaws working out in a rural area, which was supposed to be more serene than that. The SUP also has gone from 55,000 cubic yards to 1 million cubic yards. Do you know how big 1 million cubic yards is? If you take a cubic yard, it's 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, 3 feet long. 1 million of those, that's 3 million linear feet if you stretched it out. That's 568 miles of debris they're talking about putting on Behringer Mountain. That will destroy that mountain. They can talk about reclamation and putting trees back where they have leveled the ground. That's a mountain. It's not intended to be level. It's been here long before any of us were here, and it should be here after we're gone. I'm also concerned about the safety. As everyone else, and very clearly that S-shaped place on Walton when you come up from Radford Road. I've been there when a bus has been there, picking up kids in the morning. When the bus begins to move, it's long. It cuts across the lane. Anything coming the other way can't be there when the bus is trying to leave. And I've been there when trucks are coming down, loaded from whatever they pick up, the recycling location, and those trucks coming down on a foggy morning on a road slick. If the bus was there at the same time, I think we're just opening ourselves up to something tragically happening to kids, to grandkids, to great-grandkids. I hope that never happens, but I'm worried about that happening, and they're asking for this to go on for 40 years. To the good faith of the citizens of Montgomery County, to working not only for the businesses in Montgomery County, I respectfully ask that you deny this proposal, and the proposal based on what it says and not what some of the answers were tonight. Thank you very much.
Barbara Devini. And after Barbara Larry Vaughn.
Barbara DeVinny, 1267 Snapdragon Lane, Christiansburg. I live across Walton Road from the landfill site. I'm here to ask you to vote against the proposed landfill special use permit. As you know, the last SUP was rejected by the Board of Supervisors because of serious concerns about traffic hazards presented to our area by this operation. There is risk to school children using the MCPS bus route on Walton Road, which is a rural, windy road, as you've heard, with limited sight distance, as you saw in the photos. And the issue is not traffic accidents in the past. Instead, we have a situation where we have the opportunity to look ahead and envision what might happen and try to avoid a tragedy by not increasing the potential for dump trucks to crash into a school bus, which members of the Board of Supervisors considered a grave risk with the earlier SUP. Nothing has changed in the safety profile of this operation, except to request the opportunity to increase the land from 3 acres to 34 acres, which would bring more trucks going in and out, as well as more noise and dust and disturbance from dump materials, which will go in an area that goes quite close to nearby homes. The proposed expanded landfill area would have just a 75-foot buffer between the dump and each nearby property. Whatever resource stewardship means, it doesn't seem that it should mean filling up the land with debris, putting 18 times more volume of rubble landfill in these hollows, and destroying the existing natural environment and its plants and animals. The Planning Commission has voted against this use of this land, and I ask you to think about what it would be like to have such a landfill so close to your home and what it would do to your environment, as well as to be mindful of the public safety issues related to road hazards. I ask you to vote against this SUP. And then, Mr. King, with regard to the $3,000 political donation, that was in 2022, according to the Virginia Public Access Project website. So it seems like you would again have a conflict of interest with this vote. Thank you.
Larry Vaughn.
Good evening. I'm Larry Vaughn, 1267 Snapdragon Lane. I'm speaking in opposition to the special use permit. It is a poorly executed idea to solve a problem that is not a crisis. And most importantly, the SUP application itself has such severe deficits that it should not be rewarded with an approval. It contains serious intentional omissions and is incomplete and incorrect in places. And that's what I'll concentrate on, even if I'm repeating myself from some of the other speakers. There's been no substantial revision since the first application for a 7-acre fill in 2021, except to expand it to 34 acres. In the March 28, 2022 public hearing for the expansion of the site after it had already been approved, Mr. Neal explained the key reason for coming back so soon to ask for an extension, and it's that the part of that hollow had already been permitted by DEQ because there were no jurisdictional streams. But at minute 57:23 seconds of that meeting, Mr. Neal noted that the Planning Commission had concerns about possibly filling other parts of the property. And remember, this is last year when this was just 7 acres. And he said that expanding beyond what they were asking for last March would, quote, that would present other problems, and I do believe there is a jurisdictional stream that drains to Lithia Spring, so that would be a different watershed altogether. And that was not presented in December to the Planning Commission. It wasn't mentioned tonight by him. I think it's an intentional omission of an important environmental aspect. At the supervisors meeting on April 26th of 2021, again for this expansion, Mr. Neal said that this is for the original permit. Mr. Neal said that Mr. Phillips, this is a quote, hour 2, 7 minutes, 15 seconds. Mr. Phillips will try to recycle 90% of that stuff that comes in on the truck and utilize it. And I don't doubt that perhaps he was sincere, but for the expansion hearing last April 11th, in responding to Supervisor Biggs, will this be a continuing thing? Hour 3, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Mr. Phillips intends to, quote, continue on beyond the requested extension because we've got 200 acres here. So even when they were asking for 4 more acres, they already planned to expand over. Supervisor Bowen asked, what percentage of the new material coming to this site do you actually recycle? What part is being recycled? And Mr. Phillips said 10%. They got the permit in 2021 saying they would recycle 90%. They were recycling 10%, which is one of the reasons that they need to continue to expand and expand and expand. They're not doing what they said they were going to be doing. I would like to point out that Mr. Neal had mentioned that there will be a conservation open space, but I don't see that in the ordinance that's under your consideration, and I don't know what conserved open space is in any formal way. I know there are conservation easements and such. I think that's an important question to ask because in all prior applications, they have said all remaining land will be forested. Well, of course it will. Anything that they don't tear up and fill will be forested. So that is a truism, but I don't believe that there's much teeth in this conservation open space. I'd like to point out that the permit also says that most construction happens during the leaf-off season. That's not true. I can see the dump trucks from a hill half-mile away. I see the dump trucks coming in and out of the road all the time. Leaf off. Last week, 6 trucks, just while I was going in and out. So I'd like to point that out. And finally, the junked cars, Mr. Phillips didn't clean those out. Those were gone before he bought the property. No doubt those triers were there and he cleaned them up. Thank you.
That completes the sign-up sheet. If there is anyone else that'd like to come forward to speak on this public hearing, please come forward. You'll have 4 minutes to state your name and address.
Bobby Phillips, owner-operator of this operation, New Recycling. In the last meeting, Michael Myers said that we was a liar and that we never recycled any concrete, never recycled anything at all. We did recycle concrete. We have several thousand tons, and I will get you all the receipts and stuff where I rented a grinder. We run the grinder for 40 hours. We run 2 excavators and a dozer, and not a soul heard it for 40 hours. Not a soul heard it. Not a person here said anything about all the noise we made, because you can't hear all that stuff. I think a lot of the people here are a little reckless with the truth. And, you know, we run a very good operation, and, you know, I understand there's some trucks and stuff going in and out, and I understand it make noise. I make noise every day. I start my operation on in Radford at 5 in the morning every day. I load trucks every morning at 5 o'clock. I've never heard a complaint from anybody, any neighbor ever. But they talk about the safety of that curve. I'm willing to put in $100,000 if they're willing to match me, and we'll fix that curve. We'll get the VDOT to fix it, or hire an independent contractor to fix it. But as far as the recycling goes, every load is different. Some loads you can recycle every bit of it, some you can't. We do our best. I'm not under any obligation to recycle 1 pound, but I do. I mean, I try to recycle it as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to come forward to speak on this public hearing? Seeing no one come forward, we will close this public hearing. Next up, guidelines for public address. This is the citizens' time to address the Board of Supervisors. Speakers are requested to provide their name and address. There will be a sign-up sheet that I'll call the names first. Each citizen has 4 minutes to address the board. All comments must be directed to the chair and other supervisors from the front lectern. Begin by saying your name and address. Debate between speakers and members of the audience will not be allowed. Speakers may leave any written statements or comments to the supervisors with the board clerk. Speakers will be judged out of order should the speaker engage in any personal attacks, use of profanity, or abusive language, or debate with the audience and not address the supervisors. First person up is Mr. Glenn Stanger.
Thank you for allowing me this time. I'd like to present my opposition to the proposed rezoning of the Williams property for the Roanoke Valley Holdings for three major reasons. First is the additional traffic on 114. Proposed turning lanes will not solve the traffic problem. If you want to see that, go to the light at Price's Fork after 4 p.m. on a weekday and see that the traffic is backed up as far as 1 mile up the road and down the road. Lowering the speed limit and enforcing it will be the only way to reduce wrecks and traffic. I have to move farm equipment up and down the road, and quite often there are a few areas to safely pull off to let traffic pass, so it backs up for several miles. At times it takes 5 to 10 minutes just to get on the road. Second is the loss of farmland. With extended drought in the breadbasket of the country and rising fuel costs, very soon it may be necessary to produce food locally. Remember that every acre you take out of food production is sterilized, and building houses is forever. It may be that our kids' lifetime people may go hungry. It may not be that now, but it may be in the future. People don't realize that food doesn't originate in a grocery store, but instead it's got to be grown. And it may be surprised to know that you might know that nationally 21 million acres is being taken out of production each year to build houses, and God is not making any more land. Another issue that encroachment or trespassing seems to be a continual problem when you have housing pushed up against farmland. We have land that will be adjacent to that. Third, and most important to me, is the stormwater problem that's occurring. I own property where that land is going to go into Slate Branch, and I also own property where Strubles Creek and Slate Branch merge in Coal Hollow. It then passes through a double tunnel under the railroad on its way to New River. In the past, I have seen floodwaters halfway up the tunnel on both sides, rendering my access to the property impassable for days or even weeks at a time until all that water drains through. And I have to cross the creek a second time, both of them merged, in order to get onto my property. This is the only access I have. No other way to get to it. I have brought pictures of the tunnel that y'all can look at from both sides and see what I'm talking about. These two creeks drain the south side of Price's Fork for a lot of Blacksburg, from Price's Fork to, across 460 to the Price's Fork area. The entire Price's Mountain Road and the south and the north side of 114 from 460 to the Coal Hollow Road. This also includes the new park Christiansburg's got, some on the north side of 114, Walmart, the two malls, because it drains under the 460, which the Continental Divide goes down the middle right there. It also includes a duck pond on the Virginia Tech campus and a great deal of the town of Blacksburg. You've already approved about a 400 housing unit or more project on the south side of Price's Fork Road in Price's Fork. And that storm water is going to go down Strubles Creek also, adding to that problem. How many acres do you expect all this additional housing and roadways to cover? This area is that water cannot soak into and will be storm water.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next up, Bob Beard. Mr. Beard? Okay. That completes the list. Would anyone else like to come forward for public address? You have 4 minutes.
Chris Waltz, 1370 Wrigley Street. I noticed that tonight the school resource officers are on here for a work session. I know that there's been a lot of, in articles I've read, there seemed to be a lot of misinformation put out. How shocked you are. You shouldn't be. There was a meeting between Sheriff Blevins, Mr. Meadows, Randy Wingfield, and the mayor. Chair Blevins sent a letter back to the town saying that they were not going to fund the school resource officers. My wife actually read it at one of these meetings. Mayor Barber responded and said that we still think you ought to. And I think you ought to. We pay, as Christiansburg citizens, 89 cents per $100. And it seems like what we spend, you spend in other parts of the county and go, oh, well, Christiansburg, you get however much, 39, whatever it is. You do everything. The schools are your responsibility. It's not the town of Christiansburg. They've been nice people because originally you all didn't have school resource officers in the county schools. At that time, I think you were shirking your responsibilities. Now it's the cool thing to do. Everybody wants an SRO. So you chose to put them in and told the other, well, you can keep paying for it. I think the only thing that surprises you is that they finally decided to stand up and say, well, no, we're not going to be your little pets. We're not going to do what you want. We're not going to be a doormat for you anymore. You all need to fund these school resource officers it's your responsibility for the town of Christiansburg and the town of Blacksburg. You know, it's about time that you start giving some. If we need roads fixed, we don't get them fixed unless 50% comes from the state. You don't contribute to that. Our Parks and Rec, you don't contribute to that. Yet you expect us to allow people from outside the town of Christiansburg to come in and use the aquatic center for the same rate that citizens of Christiansburg pay, to not, for summer camps, that they don't distinguish between where you're from. But you all seem to like to distinguish where you're from. And especially, you know, saying other things that are just silly, like, well, we support law enforcement. It has nothing to do with supporting law enforcement. It has to do with funding. It has nothing to do whether it's Sheriff Parton, Chief Sisson, and whoever the chief in Blacksburg is, like the arrangement. It has to do with funding. You know, be honest when you're talking to these people. Say, it's because we don't want to pay for it. We would rather have somebody else pay for it so that we can have that money to spend on whatever else we want. Fiber, putting roads in the unincorporated areas of the county. Just be honest with people. But you should fund the SROs. It's your responsibility. And I'm a taxpayer in the county. We get double taxed. And you're not giving us a very good return on our investment. I don't see that you give us much of anything. At this point, it may be better for us to become a city, take that 89 cents, incorporate it into our taxes, and do our own thing. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to come forward for public address?
One second, please. Good evening, Bob Beard. I live here in Christiansburg. I want to say thank you for allowing me to speak. I think you guys do a good job. I mean, you guys got a hard job, and you know, more often than not, you guys get the job done. But there's still always room for improvement. And I know I've been talking about this for a while, and that's the money that you guys allocated for Christiansburg High School. I know we can't get the money back, but when we're spending $95 million, when Salem did the exact same project for $35 million, I'm just not done talking about it yet. I know you guys have a joint session with them coming up, and you know, and it's a shared session. But I like to put a request in that it's a town hall style meeting, so we really have the ability to ask the school board direct questions regarding that renovation. You know, most of these questions I've asked before, but some new ones is how many square feet of this renovation is new construction versus renovation? What do you guys build projects all the time. What's the cost for new construction versus renovation? I understand we're spending $450 a foot for this project. It's just crazy, just crazy. So on the next couple pages, I want to, I did some comparisons trying to compare Christiansburg High School versus Salem. Okay, and just kind of look at some of the differences. Christiansburg High School has 1,000 students. Salem has 1,700. We have a 13-to-1 student ratio. They have a 16-to-1. Minority enrollment, we're at 20%. They're at 62%. And the key stat on here is graduation rate. We're at the top 50%. They're at the top 30%, even with a high minority enrollment. So that shouldn't play a role. And reading proficiency, they're in the top 10%. We're in the top 50%. Those are just some questions we need to make sure we're asking. And on the next page, I've got some comparisons between East Montgomery, Auburn High School, and Blacksburg. And you guys will notice on there that East Montgomery and Auburn only have 300 some students each, okay? Whereas Christiansburg had over 1,000 and Blacksburg's got 1,200. We got two schools that are being totally underutilized. The graduation rate for East Montgomery is the bottom 50%. The bottom 50%, why? The reading proficiency is only in the top 50%. All the other schools are in the top 5 or top 10. Blacksburg's in the top 5% for reading proficiencies. East Montgomery, the lunch assistant is supposedly at 50%, and Blacksburg's at 15%. The county average is 35%. It doesn't quite seem equitable that East Montgomery is being left behind, and when we talk about all the issues. We talk about the new construction going on in Blacksburg. We hear talk about Blacksburg High School needed to expand. And we got these schools right here, they're being underutilized. So when you guys do your planning and your conversations, just be sure to ask about redistricting some of Blacksburg and Christiansburg to go into East Montgomery and Auburn High School so we maximize our efficiencies. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to come forward for public address? Seeing no one come forward, we will close public address. Addendum?
No addendum this evening, Madam Chair.
All right, next up, items of consent. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Fidzikowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you. Next up, into work session. Do I have a motion? Do I have a motion to move into work session?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fidzikowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Madam Chair, we have two items under work session this evening. In the agenda packet, we listed preliminary revenue estimates first and school resource officers second. But I know there's some folks that are here for the SRO discussion this evening, so if it's the will of the board, let's move that one first.
That's fine.
So I believe we have a presentation. What we want to do this evening with the topic of school resource officers is just a little bit of a history. I know that this has been quite the topic in recent days between the town of Christiansburg and the county, but several of you had asked staff what the history was on SROs in the county and how those have worked over the years. And so Assistant County Administrator St. Clair is going to just do a brief overview and then allow for any discussions or questions. There are no decisions that are going to be made on this issue this evening that I'm aware of. It's mainly for update and information. So Brad, turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. Sorry, my allergies are up. This wind is killing me. Yeah, just to give a brief update on the SRO status in Montgomery County Public Schools. 2022, currently, all schools that are in the unincorporated portions of Montgomery County have a SRO placed in them, which is through the Sheriff's Office. In the schools that are in the town of Christiansburg and Blacksburg, they have their own plan within the town limits of which schools have SROs and do not have SROs. The town of Blacksburg, Christiansburg, police departments, and the Sheriff's Office kind of have a long-standing program to where they have worked out who provides what and where. And that's what's currently in place in Montgomery County at this time.
Brad, would you advance the slide so the audience can see those too? I think it's underneath you there on the.
Sure.
Thank you.
There we go. We'll move to the next one. The SROs really became a nationwide push, as most of you probably remember, in the 90s, particularly the late 90s. I know when I came to the sheriff's office in 1999, there were SROs, limited number of SROs in place throughout the county, and that program has kind of expanded since then. As it says, each town, police department has managed the SRO program within the towns, and the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office has managed the SRO program in the unincorporated portions of the county. All agencies, both police departments and the Sheriff's Office, maintain an MOU with the Montgomery County Public Schools for placement of the SROs in the schools. And just having here too, as far as jurisdiction goes, obviously the Sheriff's Office has jurisdiction county-wide, and a town police department, should the town elect to appoint a police chief and through ordinance create a police department, they, by code, become the primary law enforcement entity within that respective town. There's a precedent of collaboration county-wide amongst the agencies dating back to the inception, and some points to bring out that show that are the Christiansburg Middle School. Most of you can probably remember when it was on College Street in Christiansburg. It was inside the town. When it moved, I think it was around 2006, if my memory serves well, it moved out to its current location, which is on Buffalo Drive. And at that time, Buffalo Drive was outside of the corporate limits of the town of Christiansburg. So at that time, the sheriff's office covered the SRO in the middle school. When the town of Christiansburg annexed out Mud Pike a little ways and took in the middle school, the town of Christiansburg came back in and started supplying the SRO. So there was a couple-year period of time there the sheriff's office did supply an SRO to Christiansburg Middle School when it was in the county. The town picked it back up.
Brad, will you advance that slide again? I'm sorry.
Sure, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm moving ahead. I've got two on my paper and one up
That's
here.
no worries.
Yeah. And like I said, after annexation, Christiansburg, picked that back up. And another point of collaboration is Blacksburg High School. As you remember, the collapse of Blacksburg High School created significant issues for Montgomery County Public Schools. And the solution was they moved Blacksburg Middle School to the old Christiansburg Middle School site, which was up on College Street in the town of Christiansburg. And in doing so, during the construction of the new high school, they sent a Blacksburg police officer to the middle school here in the town of Christiansburg to staff that. And so it's kind of a community, it's always kind of been a community type approach to problem solving and providing SROs in the school.
Go around the room and see if any supervisors have any questions. We'll start off with Supervisor Bone.
No questions. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Supervisor DeMotts.
I don't have any questions yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor King.
I have no questions. Thank you for the information, though.
Yes, sir.
Supervisor Fidzikowski.
No questions.
Supervisor Shepherd.
No questions.
Vice Chair Biggs.
No questions on your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. St. Clair. No questions.
Thank you.
We will open it up for discussion. Do we have any discussion?
Yeah. Do you have anything that you wish to say?
Well, I guess I'll start off, as I said before, a few times. I think we should pay for SOR officers. It's part of the school system. And it's just my opinion. I think we should put them in the schools. I do hope that politics has got into this, and I hope it don't interfere with nothing else. That we need to sit down with the town council and discuss this and see how we can resolve it. But I do think we should pay for it.
Well, I don't know if we should pay for it or not, but if we're going to have a discussion with the town council of Christiansburg, then we need to talk to Blacksburg too. And I would like to know how many total officers that would be and what the dollar would be for that at some point. And where we're going to get that.
Supervisor DeMont? Any question? Any? Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Fidzikowski?
Well, I don't know if I have anything to add, but when the sheriff came to us and asked us for more SROs, the whole purpose was to cover schools that were out away from the towns. Each town has its own police department and therefore has a squad or whatever is assigned during the day and during the night. And they're able to respond much quicker. We can't respond that quick in the county because it's a lot more square miles to cover. And even if a deputy is assigned to an area, that doesn't mean he's not going to be called away to another area to assist another deputy. So this made the schools out in the county vulnerable. And that's why we agreed to that. The towns don't have that issue. As far as who's going to pay for what, I am opposed to paying for town officers, but if it comes down to it, then I would be willing to pay for deputies in those schools.
Supervisor Bone? Supervisor DeMont?
I'll just add to the discussion that I agree with you, Supervisor Fidzikowski.
Vice Chair Biggs?
Okay, I think I made myself clear in the newspaper that the bottom line for me is the safety of the students and the employees in this county. And in order to do that, in order to reach some kind of solution to this, I'm open to working with all the groups involved. That would include us. It would include law enforcement. It would include the schools. And of course, it includes the two towns. I don't know what it might take to resolve this, but to me, lives are the bottom line, and lives are important. And so whatever is needed, I think we need to go ahead and have some kind of discussion and get it resolved. Because we don't want folks out there thinking that, hey, we're going to pull resource officers out or we're not going to cover our children. So that's all I have to say on it. You guys know I've been advocating for a school resource officer in every school, regardless if they're in the towns. And I've brought this up before. If you're in Blacksburg and an officer's at Kipps and something that happens at Harding or Margaret Beeks or Gilbert Linkus, everyone knows what the traffic is like in Blacksburg. So even though I understand the whole thing about miles in the county, I also understand about conditions within the two towns if you're trying to get from one place to another. So that's all I have to say.
You good? Supervisor Shepherd?
I was just going to say, I agree with Supervisor Fidzikowski. If we're going to pay for them, I'm not in favor of paying for town officers. I think we'd pay for our own deputies to be there.
before I became an elected official, I had advocated for law enforcement, relationships with law enforcement and positive, and for school safety. I would like to see resource officers in all school. Someone had mentioned, why was I shocked? I wasn't shocked. I was shocked that they would take and remove school resource officers out of our schools. I am personally, passionately opposed to that. We just went to VACO where two of our legislative priorities were for law enforcement and school resource officers. We all need to work together. The schools, law enforcement, the parents, to keep our schools safe. And why I was so upset or shocked was that I fought to get school resource officers with Fallen Branch. And for Christiansburg to say, if you do not reimburse the police department to serve and protect those kids, that they will pull those resource officers out. I know I got a little loud. I'm very passionate about that. That's the mama bear coming out of me. So I would like to collaborate with everyone to make sure we will do, and I believe I have the commitment of this board, that we will do what is best to serve our citizens, and we will keep our citizens safe. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, and there are a lot of logistics, and there's back things. It's not like a switch and it's done. But I do believe this board is committed to find a way. We will not let our citizens down.
Very well said.
Let's take a 10-minute recess. preliminary revenue estimates.
Board members, Budget Director Magruder's here this evening with all the facts and figures from our latest work on the budget. So he's excited about sharing, and I believe you got a handout a little earlier for that as well. So Mark, turn it over to you.
Good evening. I'm going to go over fiscal year 24 preliminary revenue projections. I want to give you a little background. As we've discussed in the past, county revenue falls into two categories: undesignated revenue and designated revenue. Undesignated revenues are unrestricted revenues, meaning that they can be used for just about any purpose. On the other hand, designated revenues are restricted, meaning they're earmarked for a specific purpose and can only be used for that purpose. And so I wanted to kind of highlight our undesignated revenue makes up about 89% of all county revenue, and that's the bulk of our county revenue, and that's going to be the focus of tonight's presentation. And as a general rule, there are three categories of revenue that drive all of the revenue growth that we see on a yearly basis. Those are real estate taxes, personal property taxes, and sales and use taxes. On the designated side, designated revenue makes up around 11%, and that's made up mostly of compensation board revenue, which supports our constitutional officers, and local user fees. So I want to talk a little bit how these revenue categories have changed since 2008. And 2008 is an important year, as this was the start of the last major recession. But if we go back to 2008, the undesignated portion of the county's revenue was around 80%, and the designated portion was around 20%. And what we have seen over the years is that each year the undesignated portion has pretty much outpaced the designated portion, and that's the fact that state revenues have been fairly flat for a long time. So if we start in 2009, it was 81%, the undesignated revenue portion. In 2013, it was 87%, and now it's at 89%. So you can see that as time has gone on, the state has not given us as much revenue to support local stuff. As a result, local governments have been responsible for generating the additional revenue required to adequately fund public education, public safety, and our constitutional officers. So I shared this slide last year. It's a chart that helps to explain how the two pieces of how the revenue is generated and how we get to our growth each year. So I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about how we come up with those. So we have the base revenue change, and that's basically the ongoing difference in current year undesignated revenue versus the budget estimate. So if we're really close to if actuals come in pretty much close to that estimate, there's not a whole lot of change in the revenue. And then you have on top of that change, you have the new revenue growth, which is additional revenue from new construction, the acquisition of new personal and new business property, and then increases in the consumption of goods such as sales taxes. So we take our base revenue growth, which is the ongoing difference in the current year estimate and the budget, plus our new revenue growth gets us our total revenue for the next year. So as you know, the last 2 years have been anything but normal. So the county is still experiencing growth in the current year that is significantly above the current or historical trends. And while we expect to retain some of that going forward, some of that will be one-time in nature, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I want to tell you what's happening in the current year. So sales tax collections are still strong and above trend. I'm actually a little surprised by that. I assumed that, we got 5 years worth of revenue growth in 1 year in sales tax. And so I did not expect us to retain that going forward, or at least not at this level. And we're still seeing those sales tax numbers coming in at a very high level. I'm starting to see them tail off a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But at this point, it looks like we will have an estimated $1.9 million in additional revenue on those collections. The county's interest rate on savings has increased from 36 basis points, or 0.36%, to 4% in 8 months. That's providing an estimated $2.1 million in additional revenue over the budget amounts. Personal property collections, all categories, and Public Service Corporation are projected to exceed estimates by $0.6 million. Delinquent tax collections are up by $0.6 million. And again, that's the result of collection agency efforts and consumers' ability to pay. And this number is actually tailing as well. We're not getting as much as we did last year. Last year, we picked up around $5 million, and the projection now is $4 million. So we lost $1 million just within that year. And I said that with delinquencies, it's easy to pull a lot off the top, but once you start getting down, there's less and less to pull from. Recordation taxes are actually trending to the normal trend, but we had the sale of a large apartment complex, and that's resulting in $0.7 million in additional revenue just from that one particular sale. And then our real estate is actually trending very close to the estimates with base growth of about $100,000. So this gives you a picture of the additional revenue growth in the current year. So I'm expecting us to exceed revenue estimates by $6 million. And you can see the categories here in the current year, which I just kind of went over, real estate all the way down through our merchants capital. Again, merchants capital we are collecting in the current year, so that number is flat for the current year. But looking at the base change, I'm going to retain the real estate going forward. Sales tax will retain, or I anticipate that we'll retain that. The interest in savings is estimated at $2 million for next year. Personal property at $0.6 million. Delinquent tax collections, I'm estimating about 0.4. We'll retain about 0.4 of that 0.6. Recordation, I don't think it's basically flat with the exception of that apartment complex, so I don't have any additional revenue there. The other categories, that's essentially the cigarette tax. We are not currently collecting it in the current year, so I don't have an estimate for it, but we budgeted $100,000 for a 6 months time period. So that 0.1 or that 6 months worth is in the base going forward. And then our merchants capital, we abolished that for next year, and so that removes $1.5 million in base revenue. So going forward into next year, from a base standpoint, we're looking at 3.6 that we will be able to retain before new revenue growth is added. We'll talk a little bit about the potential impacts to the 24 budget and beyond. There's really a lot of stuff that's happening right now, and it's fascinating from an economic standpoint. But opinions vary on what the economic outlook is going to be like in calendar year 23 and 24. Most forecasts suggest the U.S. economy will dip into a recession sometime during the year. We may already be in a recession. How deep the country will fall into a recession is unknown at this point. I do have some information on inflation. Inflation is still hot, and it potentially could get worse, even with the Fed's attempt to cool that. The annual inflation rate was 6.5% in December, which is still high. Supply chain issues are still present. The Federal Reserve's monetary policy, again, I said earlier, the Fed increased the Fed funds rate from basically zero, to 4.25 to 4.5% within an 8-month period. That's why you're seeing a huge increase in interest earnings. When we adopted the budget, we had an agreement with the bank that we would receive 36 basis points, which is basically no revenue. And then as the Fed decided to increase rates, the bank has come forward with matching rates that are very similar to what the Fed funds rate is currently providing. That's why you're seeing an increase. in those revenues in the current year, and why that number is so high, because the interest rate was pushed so much. The stock market is still overvalued, even with the fact that we are down somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% in stocks. The valuation on those is still high relative to GDP. So that's still a concern. Real estate values are at peak levels, which everybody knows. And then vehicle values are dropping, and I'll give you some statistics on what's happening there. So late model used vehicles are down about 5% from the all-time highs. And then vehicles that are 5 years or older are right now around 15% below their all-time highs. So going into next fiscal year, the values are going to be based on the January 1 figure. And so I'm not going to see a huge decrease in that immediately. But I do think that by the time we're having this conversation in 2025 for the 25 budget, I think that the values will have normalized back more to our normal trend levels. So we'll see as time goes on, and supply and demand will have an impact on that, along with interest rates. The other big thing going on right now is the county's general reassessment. The county is required to reassess real estate every 4 years. The general reassessment is effective January 1st of 2023. The Board of Equalization will hold hearings beginning February 22nd of this year. Final reassessment numbers will be available in March or April. And the revenue projections that I'm getting ready to show are before the BOE completes their work and are based on a revenue neutral real estate rate of 70 cents. So the current rate is 89 cents, revenue neutral is 70 cents, and that's what the revenue projections are based on. At 70 cents, the value of 1 penny on the real estate rate is $1,174,846. So right at 1.2 million. All right, new growth going into next year. Historically, new undesignated revenue growth is around 2.2 to 2.5 million per year. The projection for new revenue growth for fiscal year 24 is 3 million, and that is based on new real estate construction plus the 1% allowable value that is allowed when you do a reassessment. The projection is based on actual reassessed real estate values for calendar year 23 and known construction for calendar year 24. The actual personal property book values based on the 22 book and historical growth patterns. And this, again, would include leaving the assessment ratio at 80% and then adjusting that value in August for motor vehicles. Again, I think we're going to see some level of adjustment on the January 1st. I don't think it's going to be enough to put us all the way back to where we should be back on normal trend. But if this situation continues, I think that maybe by the year 2025, values will have normalized back, and we'll be back at that level where we can maybe not have to put an assessment level on there, back to what is more reasonable for the market. Sales tax growth is at 1.29%. That's lower than our normal trend is around 3 to 4% per year. I'm using the same percentage increase that the state is using in their projections. And then normal trend analysis for recordation and delinquent taxes. The projection that I'm getting ready to share with you does not reflect any major economic downturn. It's hard to say exactly when and what will happen going into the next year. I'm starting to see a slowdown in sales tax. We've had 2 back-to-back months of lower retail sales numbers. November and December were 2 back-to-back declines. I don't know how much that's going to impact going forward. I know that the sales tax numbers are 2 months behind. So the number that I'm going to receive in February is the December collections, and that's our big one because that's got all the Christmas sales in it. That's going to tell me a lot about where we are headed going into the rest of this budget year and where we're headed into the next fiscal year. So once I have that information, I'll share that with you when we present the proposed budget. All right, again, our new revenue growth, $3 million. It's $2.2 million in real estate, $500,000 in personal property motor vehicles, roughly $200,000 in sales tax, and then we budgeted for what we thought would be about 6 months worth of the cigarette tax. That was $100,000, so that was the number that was in the base slide, and then an additional $100,000 would make up the entire year. So we think that the cigarette tax will generate $200,000. That's the additional $100 going into next year. That gets you $3 million total. The next slide shows you the detail, shows you the undesignated revenue from the fiscal year 23 approved budget, $127.2 million. And then the increases in actual numbers all the way through. Again, notice that we have eliminated the merchant's capital out of the base at $1.5 million. So the base revenue adjustments, $3.6 million. And then new revenue growth of roughly $3 million. Total increase in new revenue is $6.6 million for next year. Talk a little bit about the proposed budget at the state. According to the school staff, additional state funding for fiscal year 24 is estimated at $4.7 million. On the county side, the only additional money that I see is from compensation board funding, and that's based on a 5% salary increase from the state for constitutional officers and the staff. The amount of additional funding is roughly $304,000. However, there's non-supplanting legislative language that requires the county to provide a 5% raise in order to receive the revenue. And that is what I have for this evening. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mark. We'll go around the room. We'll start off with Supervisor King.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate all this hard work. On the merchant capital tax that we voted to do away with, it's $1.5 million, and it varies every year, right?
It's pretty consistent. It's been about 1.5 for the last several years. We don't get a tremendous amount of growth off of that number. It's been anywhere from 1.3 to 1.5 million the last few years.
Well, I know some merchants said that they couldn't get their product and everything else, so.
I haven't seen too much of a decline. There was, I think, 1 year in which we were close to 1.7 and it dropped back down to 1.5. But if you look at the trend over time, it's anywhere from 1.3 to 1.5.
All right. And let me find it here. So what do you think all the growth is going to be this year?
I think that the new revenue growth is the $3 million that we're looking forward to going into the next year. But you're going to have what I'm suggesting is that in the base budget, you know, I think we're going to end the year with $6 million in excess revenue over our budget estimates. Of that $6 million, we have to take the 1.5 out from the merchant's capital. It's not going to be there. And then there's a few others that I've reduced down a little bit based on what I think is what's going to normalize. We're going to retain 3.6 of that going forward, plus an additional 3. So you'll have 6.6 million in new revenue to spend going into the next fiscal year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Supervisor Fidzikowski.
No, somebody stole my question, so I'm good.
Supervisor Shepherd.
So $6 million in new revenue for this year. Refresh my memory, I guess. What is the average? What do we normally grow?
Under normal circumstances, you know, up until COVID, there wasn't a whole lot of base revenue change, meaning that the estimates were coming in pretty much with what we budgeted. And so it's only been the last 2 years in which we've exceeded the revenue. as I stated earlier, we had 5 years' worth of sales tax growth in 1 year. We had 10 years' worth of motor vehicle valuation change in 1 year, which you guys reset the rate on because it was just, those numbers are just astronomical. So there has been a significant amount of extra revenue coming in as a result of things due to the pandemic and the government's response to the pandemic. So this is not normal, and it will eventually come back to normalize. I can't tell you exactly when. It's all going to come straight back to normal. There's too many factors involved. I knew that the Fed was going to have to adjust interest rates in order to address inflation. Reason that we're getting $2 million in extra revenue this year is because of the interest rate went from virtually nothing to 4% in 8 months. And so, our normal growth is around 2.2 to 2.5 million. So we're still well above where we would normally be.
Right, okay. That's what I thought.
If you look on slide 7, I'm waiting for Mark to get there. Okay, typically we don't have any base change, almost no base change. And as you know, while we've gone through the pandemic, like Mark talked about, we've been conservative in our estimates and tried to make sure that we didn't push those out and then fall off a cliff and have a big hole in the budget, because no one wants that. But like he said, because that's kind of stabilized, we felt comfortable with that this year going forward. And then the new growth, which is the next piece, I don't know exactly what slide that's on, but that is fairly typical, right, Mark? The new growth number.
Yeah, I mean, so our new growth is, on this slide, on slide 10, I show it's between 2.2 and 2.5 million in new growth. And we're at 3 million. Really, the reason we're at 3 million is because of the 1% allowable value. That 1% allowable value, and then the sales tax number, normally I would probably be bringing you a $400,000 increase in sales tax. Right now I'm showing around $200,000. Based on some information that I've already received this month, that number's already changed. And so there's gonna be some ebb and flow over the next few weeks until I figure out where this really is gonna be. That December collections number is gonna be big for sales tax going forward. So the two things, if we want to talk about things that are going to be impacted, the real estate values are the real estate values. The known construction, that number for the most part hits almost to the dollar amount almost every year. And the reason is we know what's being constructed and what's going to get added on. The things that are variable are sales tax. I have no control over what people decide to pay for and what they decide not to pay for. Same thing with the interest rates. I had no idea that the Fed was going to move as quickly as they did to get the interest rate to 4%. And at the time, the banking services agreement we only had 36 basis points, which would generate roughly $100,000 in revenue. At 4%, it generates, close to $4 million in revenue. And so, I'm estimating, one, it's a blended rate for the current year, and I'm not sure what interest rates are going to do next year, and we're not tied at this point. We are not tied to an index. So that number is going to swing a little bit, depending upon what rates do, and then whether or not we get an agreement from the bank on if they're going to tie it specifically to that rate.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Supervisor Bone.
I really love all this information, but I love the little history about the changes from 2008, from 80% to 89%. That's really huge numbers of millions of dollars that the county has had to absorb. Do you have a sense of how much that is?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, if you go back that far, the value of the budget was a lot lower.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's at least $15 million. it's in the neighborhood of that.
I don't,
right?
I don't want to say because I'm not sure what that number is, but I will tell you that the state has not kept the pace in growth over the years.
And so how has that changed with regards to the fact that we're over 100,000 in population? And I'm assuming that the calculation for the schools is changed for us, or hasn't it?
The school revenues are based on ADM, and they have a factor that they use, a calculator at the schools that determine how much revenue that they get based on that.
But it wasn't a step change, I
The
guess.
composite index changed.
Yeah, the composite index changed based on our ability to pay, which if you have more ability to pay, you receive less state revenue.
And that did happen.
So how, like,
Not this year, but during that time period. We'll get that number for you too.
okay. On slide 6, the third bullet, so personal property collections are projected to exceed the estimates by 0.6. That's after the 80% change?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I'm not quite sure, like, later on in the presentation, when you have the real estate numbers on slide 11, is that at 89 cents? Is that at 70 cents?
Those are all revenue neutral. That's 70 cents.
So at 70 cents, we're gonna get an extra 2.2 million.
That's right.
So I don't understand what revenue neutral actually is. That's that 1% that you keep talking about that we get to
So-
The
retain?
2.2 on this slide is from new construction.
Okay,
And the 1% allowable value.
Right.
okay. On slide 7, for the recordation taxes, you have 0 million for base change. But wouldn't we think that it would go up because of even just the Prices Fork developments?
No, actually, it's going down because interest rates are going up, and it's based on real estate transactions. So if people don't buy homes, we don't record the recordation tax on them. So as interest rates goes up, those values are actually going to tail off. The only reason that we're seeing this huge increase in the current year is because they sold that one major complex, which is generating the 0.7 additional recordation tax over what would be normal. So I don't have growth pushed in there because I think the real estate market is slowing down. And so I'm anticipating less
Growth.
less recordings because of the higher interest rate, which is then going to have
But
less.
level from
Right.
this year.
Exactly.
Okay. And then the other categories at 100,000 for the cigarette tax, but didn't we tie that to rec expense? Like all that's going to rec?
It is, but we're not actually receiving any revenue because the cigarette tax ordinance hasn't been put in play yet. And so I'm not anticipating any additional revenue because we're not collecting it yet. So I don't have anything to project on. I'm just retaining the 100,000, which was our baseline of what we thought we were going to have for the 6-month time period. And then on the other slide, I have the other 6-month time period for next year.
I gotcha.
But it's not just available for anything, like you said. It's for Parks and Rec.
Okay. Whoever our bank is, thank you very much for giving us more than 0.36, even though that's what we said that we would take. So that's very nice. Slide 8, vehicle values are dropping from 5 to 15%, which is approaching the 80% value that we're actually charging. So the numbers that you have in your expectation for fiscal year '24 is keeping that at 80%?
Yeah, I'm keeping it at 80% and then put normal growth on top of that number. I have no way to know how much that number is going to swing in either direction. I think what we're going to have to do in order to try to mitigate that is, like we did last year, come back to you in August when we have real values, and then tell you, okay, this is the factor that you need to apply to that to get that revenue that is in line with our normal growth patterns. Then I'm hoping by fiscal year '25 that the vehicle values will have normalized back to sort of normal levels, and then you won't have to apply a factor to it at all. We'll be able to take the value off the book as it is because it's back to normal trend.
I gotcha. So, just bear with me because I have a few questions here. So on slide 10, the sales tax growth, you said the state projects 1.29%. Typically, the state projects low numbers so that they can spend lots of money when they're wrong, right? Do we kind of do that too? We just use their numbers?
No, we don't use their numbers. I've never used their numbers before. I don't know what it's gonna be. I do know, just for instance, on that one particular revenue, I added 1.29% to it. That generated roughly $200,000 in growth going into next year. I got one number, which was the November sales tax number, which was our first declining month. We know December's a declining month now too, but I don't have the revenue on it. By inserting the November number into the projection, I lost all $200,000 that I put on the table, even with the 1.29% growth factor. That's how much that 1 month decline was and how it affected the projection model.
So on page 11, instead of having 0.2 million next to sales tax, we should have 0.
That's right.
Or probably a negative number.
That's right.
Okay.
But I do have, because there's other things in play, I think that the 6.6 is still going to be a good number.
Sure.
Okay, because number one, the bank has told us verbally that they are going to tie to the Fed funds rate. And if they do that, then I can raise the interest earnings from the projected number that I have in here, which is going to make up that difference.
I gotcha. Okay, so if we go revenue neutral to 70 cents, that's a decrease in our tax rate of 22 or 21%. So the average appreciation of all the real estate in the county was over 30%. So we're not giving everything back. Am I saying that correctly?
Revenue neutral is 70 cents. So that is basically taking the average value and only putting 1% across the entire county. Now, there will be some people that their value went up more than others. And so they will pay slightly more and some people will pay slightly less. But the average across the county, the average bill will only go up 1%.
The calculation the math doesn't work exactly like you're thinking about. We can show you how the formula works, but you can't say the average real estate value went up 30% and so the rate should go down 30%. It doesn't work like that.
It's always less, but it's not a third less.
It is, yes, it really is.
Okay.
Except for the 1% that Mark keeps mentioning, which is still in there.
I would like to see that math, please. So on page 12, the fiscal year 23 approved budget, 127, and then the total base revenue for fiscal year 24, the difference between those two numbers is 2.8%. Is that about right?
I didn't do the math on it, but
Something like that. When inflation has been 6.5%, how are we going to manage only spending half of what inflation is? Has anybody got any ideas?
Again, you're making the assumption this is revenue neutral. And the rate of revenue growth doesn't necessarily tie straight to inflation. As if you wanted to try and address the inflationary impact through the revenue, then you could certainly increase the real estate rate above the revenue neutral rate to mitigate the cost increases that you're seeing across the county.
So because we got rid of Merchants Capital, that's half of the base revenue increase. Am I looking at that correctly?
It would have been,
You would have had somewhere closer
It's
to
actually
6.
a third, yeah, you're right.
right. But if you look at the total revenue increase of 6.6 divided by last year's total budget of 127, that's 5%. A little over 5.
Okay. On page 13, I really couldn't understand exactly what you meant by the last bullet. Could you explain that again?
So the way that, I think it was 2017, the state legislature put in legislation that basically said that if we give you money for a raise, you have to give that raise to the employees. You cannot supplant that money and use it for some other purpose. If you do, then you do not get the revenue. So they have put in 5% for raises for constitutional officers and their staffs. And if the county would choose not to increase their pay by 5%, then you don't get this revenue.
And how much would it cost the county to meet the 5% requirement?
We haven't calculated that yet. We're still working on that. And because they calculate the 5% on what their state-approved salaries are, it's much less than than the amount we compensate our employees. So there's a shortfall there as well. But we will get that number for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Supervisor DeMott.
I think also just to dovetail with that, we have more employees than the comp board requires. So in addition to supplementing the comp board pay, we also have additional employees. So it's
right
a gift with a lot of strings. I want to start at the very beginning, slide 2. And I'm going to go through this kind of logically and quickly. Slide 2, designated revenue is compensation board revenue and local user fees. Can you give a few examples of what local user fees are?
Let's see.
Would it be like court costs? That's how I'm
Yeah,
interpreting it?
there's court costs, there's stuff that the sheriff's office charges for inmates.
Okay. I thought
HEM
that's
costs,
probably-
Inspection
Parks and
permits.
Recreation has, fees that they charge people to participate. Those are user fees. If you want to participate in sports, you pay a certain amount of money in order to have your kid play baseball.
Okay.
And those have to go back to the programs and
Right.
activities.
So they're designated
Okay.
specifically. But the lion's share of the money that's in designated revenue is constitutional officer money.
Okay.
That comes from the state. Yep.
And then on slide 6, can you speculate on the inflationary increases, say, for example, in groceries and how that's affecting the sales tax that we're collecting?
To be honest with you, I could not tell you exactly what the impact is. I think, and this is anecdotal information, what I think is happening. So we had this huge increase in stimulus money that was put into play, and people went out and started spending. And then as a result of that stimulus money, and then other monies, infrastructure money that was put into play, you started to see this massive increase. I mean, we had $15 trillion in new money that was printed since 2020, right? So that's a lot of money that gets put into play. Supervisor Bone asked me one other time, what's different now than what happened in 2008? In 2008, money didn't make it into the money supply. The additional dollars that were put in were actually to cover debts that for businesses that were going to fail, banks that were going to fail. So that money never made it to the consumer. That's why you didn't see massive inflation. However, the policies that were put in place in 2008 have continued and got even worse when the pandemic hit. So this was bound to happen at some point. This was just a catalyst that really put everything into motion. Then once things got hot, all of a sudden, now everything is more expensive. People had more money, they started charging more, and then it just kind of snowballs after that. The Fed is now trying to come back in and curb that through interest rate increases, and that's going to slow it down. However, I said in the presentation, there's still issues with that, because even with interest rate increases, there are other things that are happening on a global scale that are going to impact our ability to curb inflation. One is China was closed down with COVID, and now they're starting to reopen. So that's going to put even higher demands on the supply chain, and it's going to put pressure on other goods, which could then push inflation harder, which would mean higher interest rates even further in order to curb it down the road. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't predict all that. I know the elements and what they could possibly do. I don't have any control of them.
I know you keep a crystal ball in your office, but don't share what you see. So no, I'm kidding. The recordation taxes, that large apartment complex is Fox Ridge, H.H. Hunt. Is that the one? I'm just thinking.
I think so.
Okay. Price's Fork Road.
I think so.
On page 8, related to the vehicle values dropping, please remind me, was there special legislation that allowed us to adopt a ratio, or can we do that any year without any type of special legislation?
The ratio was in place all along. What the legislation allowed for was that you could establish a separate class. Under the previous law, it said all personal property had to be taxed at a certain level. And so that meant that vehicles and every other category of personal property would be at whatever your rate was. You couldn't separate it out. The legislation allowed you to adopt a second rate and charge one value for the vehicles and one value for everything else. And that was new. That was what they allowed. That was brand new. The assessment ratio has always been there as an option.
So we didn't take advantage of that new legislation. We did something that was a tried and true method. Okay. And then on slide number 10, I think it's just important. It's so important that I put stars next to it and double underlined it, that this projection does not reflect any major economic downturn. So the numbers that you have given us tonight are somewhat assuming that things at least stay, but if we have a recession, you'll come back and talk to us again. If we start to see an economic downturn, you'll come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you're trying to figure out what's going to happen. I think the big plays in this thing going forward are going to be sales tax and interest rates, and how that impacts both sides. I mean, I'm starting to see consumers tightening their belts, so to speak, on what they're spending. But the inflationary impact of that is going to mitigate that to some degree, because people are still going to have to pay for certain things. They may choose not to buy other things. But I don't really know how much that's going to impact going forward. I'm not pushing revenue estimates, meaning I'm trying to keep us from being in a situation where I come back to you next year and say, we got a major hole that we have to fill. And that's the worst case that you want to be in. Having extra money is way better than not having enough money and then having the financial obligation to meet it.
I completely appreciate that position, and I'm thankful that that's important to you and to all of us, I'm assuming. That was all of my questions that I had. I do want to just say thank you. You always give a fantastic presentation, and I know how well researched it is. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks.
Vice Chair Biggs.
Well, I agree with Supervisor DeMotz on that last couple of statements there. I'm happy with what you brought so far, but I'm also thinking, we have to keep everything in balance because we know we have needs and we know we're going to have to, work with our budget, figure out how we're going to pay for our budget, figure out what we're going to do about our tax rate and everything that the citizens have brought forward about reassessment. And inflation is going to also affect the way we do business, in the county and what we can, provide. So I guess I would just say, just keep us informed. And I like the idea of having a little extra money, but when you look at everything we've talked about over the last year with capital needs and operational needs and everything else, we got to balance this out. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for the presentation. Just to make sure, for clarity on my part, and maybe I'm a little bit more excited than some of the, of course, it's a little late too. So you are, and this is a conservative projection, which I know that you always do. We're always conservative and have that, we don't know what the inflation rate will be. And as the interest rates goes up, that means you're going to lose probably you've already accounted for the recordation taxes being gone if the inflation rate keeps going up.
Well, they're not necessarily gone as much as they're normalizing back to normal trend.
Back to the base.
Right.
Okay. And so this looks like overall, you're estimating with our new growth and with our revenue coming in higher, $6.6 million increase.
That's correct.
And that is based on the fact that we did car relief tax at 80%.
That's correct.
The fact that we abolished the merchant's capital tax.
That's correct.
With reassessment on average, even though we're not sure of all the appeals process, you've got to.
It was around 30% was the across the board number.
Across the board is what we're using for 30% across the board. And that is also with 6.6 as a reducing and lowering our taxes for the reassessment to 70%, which would be the neutral rate plus the 1%.
70
cents. Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's pretty amazing.
Yes, it is. It is quite amazing. When you look at how much we normally grow, I've never brought a revenue. I've never done any of the stuff that I've done in the last 2 years in the last 20. I mean, it's absolutely insane.
Out.
I think maybe when I look back on this, as my career, I've been doing this for 23 years, and this has been the toughest. I'm not going to lie, because even, going through the Great Recession, that some of the stuff snuck up on us. This stuff has kind of been going on, and it's kind of, I don't know when it's going to end. But I do know that it will normalize at some point, and I'm trying to keep us from getting too far extended that we have to pull back.
Well, and I want to add one caveat to all that too. This is just Supervisor Bond mentioned something earlier about inflation. This is the revenue side. We're working on the expenditure side now as well, and we're subject to those same inflationary issues and concerns with wages. And so not only we're seeing a significant amount of new revenue on the revenue side, which is great, but we're going to get pushed pretty hard on the expenditure side too.
Which I understand, yes, with inflation, but still I'd rather be on this side than the other.
Oh, yes.
So that's very good. And then let me ask you on these estimates, and we talked about for the reassessment every 4 years, and I guess that would be projection for the going in the future, that if this board decided not to do reassessment at every 4 years, every other year, that won't affect this going in here, but in the future.
No, it's not going to affect you now. The only concern would be, we dodged a bullet in 2008, and we're probably going to dodge a bullet now with this being on a 4-year cycle, because we went from 2008, after the recession hit, we went through 3 reassessment cycles. We grew 1%, 1%, 3% over a 12-year period. So we saw, from that, the major increase, we basically saw virtually no growth on the reassessment cycles for 3 cycles. We've had another run up again. The only issue when you look at reassessment going forward, to go like reassess next year, in order, if property values plummeted, you would have to increase your tax rate just to make revenue neutral. In other words, the revenue neutral calculation is the same regardless. All it is putting that value on what it would be to generate the same tax bill. So if revenue values on housing plummeted, you'd have to increase your real estate rate to the level for revenue neutral, and any way you dice it. So really what you're looking at is the tax liability that is generated based on the rate. Value with a lower rate generates the same tax bill as a lower value at a higher rate.
Very good. Yes, sir. And I guess we're all going to be up here hoping that we don't have any type of a downturn. That's all I have. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is good news. Any other follow-ups?
I just wanted to remind everyone, this is another step in the budget process. We're working towards getting the budget ready to present to you at the end of next month, which will be here before you know it.
And as we do every year, Mark will continue to look at the numbers, like he said, and if there's more, we'll tell you that, and if there's less, we'll tell you that too.
Sir. Thank you so much, Mark, for the presentation. Do I have a motion to come out of work session?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Just a second. Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fitchikowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Old business, rezoning Roanoke Valley Holdings LLC. Ms. Hopkins, thank you. Long night out.
Thank you. Okay, so this has been the topic of discussion for the last couple of meetings, and it's back before you tonight under old business. We have met with the applicant, and they have made several changes to which you all have in your packets. I will go over them. They have proposed a second full access road, and this is located back here next to the duplexes that will connect into the Grace Life Baptist Church property. It will be a full access, meaning it will not ever be shut. So it will be privately maintained, constructed to Montgomery County subdivision street standards, and open at all times. They have also proposed to put in a 10-foot multi-use trail between these apartments here and Peppers Ferry Road. That trail will have bollards put on it. If you remember, we done the same thing for the West Hill development in Price's Fork. It was a multi-use trail that connected out to the road. Those bollards could be removed by emergency services if there was a need to access that area for a case of road closure or something like that. So that is another emergency access that they have proposed. In addition, that multi-use trail, should we ever get to the point that we can do a multi-use trail down Peppers Ferry or some type of sidewalk that would connect into the town, this would give these residents a connection to that. They have also proposed a 50-foot taper to the Ryland property. As we stated before, we cannot accept that as a proffered condition because it is not something caused by the impacts of this development. They have revised their proffer statement, and then they have also submitted some turn lane improvement updates. So the main entrance on Peppers Ferry Road, they actually shifted that slightly. I believe he stated it was about 12 feet. That shift did allow them to get a left turn lane into the development at the full required length and a left turn lane into Rolling Hills at the required turn length. So 200-foot taper and 100-foot storage for both of those turn lanes. They have submitted this to VDOT. VDOT has reviewed it, and you should have a statement from Mr. Miller in your packet. He is also here if you have any additional questions that states those turn lanes do meet VDOT requirements with no waivers or exceptions necessary. So that means as it is presented, it could be approved once submitted. They will also still have their, of course, right turn lane in with taper as well. So the updated proffer statement, everything in blue here is new. So the previous two proffers that you've already seen, of course, are dealing with general conformance with the master plan and the evergreen screening. The third and fourth proffer that have been added deal with the second access road. It shall be designed, constructed, and maintained as a private road, open for full access to the proposed development. No more than 108 units of the allowable density may be granted a certificate of occupancy until that second full access road is provided. So once they get to the 108th unit, they have to have that private road that connects into Grace Life. All required Peppers Ferry Road turn lane improvements and the 10-foot paved trail emergency access shall be installed at the beginning of the first phase of construction. No certificates of occupancy may be granted until these road improvements and trail improvements are complete. So that is for the right and left turn lane into the development and for the emergency access road that will also be a multi-use trail with the bollards. So that is prior to any certificate of occupancy being issued for any of those dwelling units. That does not include the turn lanes onto Rolling Hills, although they will put those in at the same time. But again, we cannot take a proffer related to Rolling Hills because it is not a direct impact of this development. With that, I will take any questions you have for me.
Thank you, Ms. Hopkins. We'll go around the room. Supervisor Shepherd.
I don't have any questions. I went and met with them and saw this presentation or the updates. And I appreciate everything that they've done. They've done a great job, but I don't know. I still have heartburn over it. Still haven't decided.
Supervisor Fidzikowski.
Yeah, I think that the two improvements with the extra entrance and also the turn lanes satisfied my worries on this project. We have had a lot of folks come up. One gentleman in particular said, if you go to the Price's Fork intersection, there'll be a mile backup at 4 o'clock. I know, I've been in that backup because I have to go to a meeting on certain nights, and that's when I'm going through there. So I understand that, but I don't think that we can just say, that's it, no more development. We're not going to do anything. We're going to get out the horses and buggies and go back to a civilized society. So I think they've done as best as they can and actually exceeded what I thought they would be able to accomplish. So I'm in favor.
Supervisor King.
I think you've done really good trying to satisfy everybody, and that's kind of hard to do. But, and I do appreciate them reaching out to me and explaining to me the things that they was wanting to do. But I just have one question. On number 4 here, it says the second entrance, no more than 108 units of the allowable density may be granted occupancy until the second full access road is provided.
Correct.
Is there some reason we can't get that second road up and running? Or do you have to wait till you build that? Or, I mean,
that was a discussion that we all had, is at what point would that have to go in? And that is why they proffered this first emergency access here in the front. So that a way, the whole thinking is, if generally when you start building at the front and you go back. So if they have to build this at the very first, then that creates a lot more road that they have to build before they can put in additional dwellings. But as far as the 108th, you may want to ask the applicant. They are both here. Mr. Fralin and Mr. Simonis are here. So you may want to talk to them.
I mean, I was just wondering why, when we're putting roads in, why we can't do them both at one time.
Yes, my thinking would be they're probably not going to put these back roads in at the very beginning.
That's what
They will work, it'll probably all be like simultaneous. So they'll start doing housing at the front with the roads at the front, and while they're doing that, they'll also be doing housing at the rear. Or not housing, rather, but road work at the rear.
Well, I was just thinking, you know, of construction and everything, if you had 2 entrances. That's all.
Supervisor DeMott?
I appreciate the changes to it, and this is going to sound, I know how much work that they've put in. I think at our last meeting, I said I was ready to vote that night. The emergency access, the 10-foot paved trail, interestingly gives me pause because we're putting a paved trail to a road with no sidewalk, no side lane. So we're putting a paved trail where people, you know, in the middle of the densest housing, where people might then walk down that little trail and start walking down Pepper's Ferry. And I know nothing's going to prevent them from walking down Pepper's Ferry regardless, but that is neither here nor there. I'm just saying that, in my opinion, I think that is an unusual thing to add to the application. Other than that, I really like it. I've liked it. The first time it came in front of us, there were some challenges with it, but I think it does meet, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the spirit of what we have kind of accepted as our priorities for development, which is on major roadways with access to services in areas that have utilities in place. I think we're hitting it with this development and where it is sited. We have a housing goal to address challenges with housing affordability in our community. So I think this development is well located, and though it's not proposing affordable housing and won't create new affordable housing, the more housing stock you have, the more housing is affordable overall. So I like it. I appreciate how much work has gone into bringing it to this point. I apologize about my feelings on the 10-foot trail. I support you in building it, but I think that piece of it is somewhat unnecessary. But thank you very much for continuing to stay after this with us, and thank you to you guys as well for continuing to work with us on this.
Supervisor Bone?
I thought the same thing, Supervisor DeMott. I couldn't believe it. I was wondering if they actually put a sidewalk, you know.
Yes, so they do not have a sidewalk.
On Pepper's Ferry.
On Pepper's Ferry,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
do not.
So I noticed on this drawing that 10-foot walk, but I also noticed a 10-foot walk between the apartment buildings and Road C.
Correct.
Is that also going to be, you know, access road for emergency service vehicles before the road that connects with the church road?
My understanding is it is not planned to be. That is actually a trail to get the single-family development over to the amenities that are within the apartments, the recreation area and the clubhouse.
Okay. So it's so small on here. The road that connects to the church road, is the church road going to be improved? I understand it's not paved at this time.
I believe that road is paved.
Is it? Okay.
It is paved, and we have looked at it, and it does meet the width requirements and everything out to the state-maintained road.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Biggs?
I appreciate the hard work from the developer and from Bree. This meets my concerns about safety, and of course, we're building from the town out. That's what that's what we've always said for our comp plan. I do know it's going to have impacts on the school and all of that. We'll have to adjust for that. But I can support the project. I was just going to ask Supervisor King, did you want your question answered about the road, or were you okay with the 108 units? You're okay? All right, thanks.
All right. Well, if Steve's here to answer that question, is that secondary because of the environmental study and the wetlands and there, Graceland, or issues that may come up? Can you refresh why?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Steve Simonis with Balzer Associates. So that is one piece of it. As we talked about at our last meeting, we know we are going to have some environmental impacts to get that road in down there. So that will be part of our first phase of due diligence. As far as the timing to get into it, Supervisor King, we sat in one of the meetings that we had over the last couple of weeks and looked through how some of that density could be built out. So it was important for us to get all the road improvements along 114 and the now controversial asphalt trail out to 114. Get that done first. So construction traffic, access in and out of the site during construction could be done safely before we start building houses. So that was the most important thing. And as you develop, typically what you like to do is when you've got a mixed type of development like this, you want to develop some multifamily, you want to develop some single family. So you've got two different product types going at one time. We have very few of those duplexes, which are back there in the back. Now, if Mr. Franlin decides to develop some of those duplexes early, we're going to be back there at that end of the site, so it may make sense to go ahead and punch through. But we're thinking, as Bree kind of mentioned, to start at the front and work our way back. So with that secondary entrance, if we can get everybody on okay with that emergency access trail tonight, we think that will help if we have emergencies that block off the one road, that we do have that extra one in until that second one in the back is installed.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. I just wanted to, first of all, thank the board for their patience. Thank you, Steve and Mr. Fralin, for working with us and doing the due diligence to making sure this project, any project on Route 114 is going to be a challenge because of the traffic and the amount of volume, and that was a concern. Is it perfect? No. But the challenges is that Route 114 is where urban expansion is, the comprehensive plan says it needs to go. I had some concerns with and I appreciate this new, I know you guys have been working several times and put a lot of effort into trying to address these issues. I had a major concern with this housing development for emergency access and for traffic to alleviate that with that second entrance. I understand, and I think the board received a letter from Grace Life that they are fully supportive with that and welcome that new community, and that will be it will be accessible. So it's not closed off once it will be there for everyone to use. The trail, I think, was just something that they were offering for construction and for emergency service until that secondary road so we would have some access way for that. The biggest thing about this project that I know can't be proffered, but in good faith will be done, is the turn lanes for rolling hills, where a lot of the rear-end collisions on Route 114 were happening. Without this project, and Mr. Miller's here, he could elaborate that, but without this project, Rolling Hills would not get that turn lane. And this would be a great improvement for Route 114 for that span where those accidents were happening. One other thing someone mentioned today during the public address was that we need to lower the speed limit. Well, we have done that from 55 to 45, but it's not, the signs I don't think have been placed just yet. But that's one thing, and we've been working for the last 2 years for that speed study to have that accomplished. So I do appreciate all the time and effort. I just want to make sure that we were doing everything we could to make this a good project for the community and for Route 114. Route 114 is a bad road, and we know that there's not, in the near foreseen future, there's not going to be any money to widen it, that it needs to be done. So again, since it is the challenge of we need housing, the challenge of this is where under the comprehensive plan that housing needs to go. It's Prices Fork, Route 8, and Route 114. All three of those are hazardous roads. So we want to try to mitigate and address as many of these concerns as well. So I do appreciate all your efforts to do that. Appreciate the board's patience. I just want to make sure we are doing the best we can for our citizens for that.
Can I add just one thing,
Certainly.
Chair Blevins? So I do want to thank the board. I mean, and I do say this with all sincerity. This project is better today than it was a month ago. So as frustrating sometimes as it seems on our end, you know, when we think we're right there at the end and we need to get deferred, this is better. So there's a lot of unknowns. I think we still would have gotten here, but the unknowns we had in early December, as far as working with VDOT and getting the secondary access, the legal piece of it to the church, that gave us the time to get that done. So thank you all for having more foresight than I did at that point. And secondly, and I'll be done, Bree and her staff are always great to work with, but I'd be remiss not to thank Jesse and VDOT. I hope you all realize how lucky we are with the VDOT representation we have in Christiansburg. We've got offices across the state, and I hear horror stories from my counterparts in other offices about the length of time it takes to get VDOT reviews done. Jesse and his folks, David and Alex, that they do great. I mean, he went above and beyond on this to really look at these matters very quickly, provide input, talk to Salem. So I just wanted to say, for the record, thank you to Jesse and the VDOT folks. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions if anybody has anything else.
Again, a great teamwork. One question, the storm water,
Yes, ma'am.
all the requirements there. I know a citizen had some issues about stormwater.
Yes, ma'am. Bree had let me know that that Mr. Stanger had some concerns about it. We looked at the GIS. We're actually a couple parcels away from him. We don't actually touch his property. We do drain through, the creek that drains through the lower part of our piece does drain out through a couple of other parcels to the north, and then gets into Slate Branch. But we do have 3 locations preliminarily shown on our plan for stormwater management. We would have to meet all the state and county regs in order to be in compliance with our stormwater laws.
Very good. Any
Thank
other
you.
follow-up? Mr. Miller, thank you to VDOT and you and VDOT for all your work on this project as well. Again, the challenge is we need housing. This is the urban expansion where it's designated, and at least we have made Route 114 with the turn lanes and the addition of the turn lane for Rolling Hills a better improvement. Motion to move this from old business to new business.
Motion.
Oh, a motion to approve. Okay, I'm sorry. Do I have a motion? A motion and a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Mr. Fisher-Kowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
7 ayes. Oh, I'm sorry, Chair Blevins?
Aye.
Now 7 ayes.
All right, thank you. All right, new business.
Madam Chair, just 2 items of new business this evening. The first one is a VDOT Economic Development Access Road Fund for Fallen Branch Corporate Park. Resolution applying for the funding.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Fisher-Kowski?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
And Madam Chair and board members, I will note we look forward to working with the town of Christiansburg on that item as well.
Policy for displaying of flags on the county-owned property.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. How about we go over what this is real quick?
This is something, Brad, Brad was, come on, okay. Brad was the architect of this. There's been several discussions within the last year. Yeah, I think he's losing it. Over the past year, we have a county flag in addition to a state flag and a federal flag that we fly over some of our facilities. And the protocols about when flags can be raised and lowered and what we can do with the county flag in particular to honor or memorialize certain events or citizens. This allows us a formal policy to address that rather than having to call you guys every time we think we need to address something. So I really appreciate Brad's work on this. I know he reached out to some other localities, and we sent this out in the fall for comment, and I think the board was okay with it. And then, like a lot of things, it kind of got laid to the side, but we wanted to get it back in front of you.
Very good. All right, motion and a second. Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the roll.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Chakowski?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Chair Blevins?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you, Brad,
Just
for all
a
your
quick
work.
question. You know, some of our county-owned facilities don't have but 2 flagpoles. So they got county-owned one and state, and then a federal on the United States on the other. So if we lower the county flag,
We talked about that because it gets very, folks think, well, we can just put up another flagpole. Well, flagpoles are expensive, but.
Yeah, the protocol would, the protocol would call, obviously, for it to be displayed below the state flag. And then if we were to lower it, then we would have to have that mechanism in place, whether there's 2 lanyards or whatever, for that flag to lower the county flag.
It'll require some adaptation, but we can make it work.
I just want to add one little piece to this. I'm really glad to see the very last sentence, the public information director shall disseminate this information on the public through normal operational protocol. And I know part of our operational protocol is use of social media. So I don't know how many times I've seen a flag flying at half and not known why, just because it wasn't on my radar for one reason or another. So I like that that was added at the end of the policy. Thank you.
We get a lot of calls.
Yeah.
All right, reports. County Attorney,
No report, Madam Chair.
County Administrator.
Just briefly, had a great trip to Richmond last week. Appreciate the chair and vice chair and Supervisor DeMotts and Deputy Administrator Hill attending. We got to talk to several of our legislators. And then to top off the week, Vice Chair Biggs and I got to speak to the new Chairpersons Institute on Friday and tell them about all the good things we have in Montgomery County. And Mary did a fabulous job, and I heard a lot of good reviews, so it was good. That's all I have.
Excellent. Go around the room. Supervisor Fidzikowski.
I don't have any report to give today, but I will say that Archie has 10 new stepbrothers and sisters. For those of you that follow the Archie story.
He hasn't eaten any of them, has he?
Supervisor King.
no report.
Supervisor DeMotts.
I don't have a report this evening besides just to second Craig's comments about attending Lobby Day in Richmond and how great it was to spend time with all of you and to advocate on behalf of Montgomery County together.
Thank you. Supervisor Bone.
I'd like to congratulate the town of Blacksburg for celebrating their 225th anniversary.
Okay. Supervisor Shepherd.
No report.
Vice Chair Biggs.
I would just say that Greg did an outstanding job too, at the presentation that we gave. And let's see, I have just 2 other things. One is sort of a follow-up on the SROs. Is our thinking, I heard like different things. Are we thinking about having a meeting? Are we thinking about exploring options? Or are we thinking about doing it during budget time, or what are we thinking, so we're just sort of not hanging out there?
One thing I'll mention, Vice Chair Biggs, is I didn't hear necessarily a consensus, but I definitely heard a lot of interest in what it would look like if the county had a county-wide program. So as we develop the budget, we will have those conversations and probably bring that forward for discussion. again, when we present the budget, that's the recommended budget, and you can certainly discuss that and amend it or remove it or whatever the board's wishes may be. But as we go through the budget process, I think that's something we'll be including unless I hear from a consensus of you that that's not something you want included.
Okay. So we'll move forward in some manner.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
what I was. The only other thing I have is a sad note. I want to bring this person's name forward. Mickey McGuigan was a colleague of mine at Harding Avenue. He was the only male teacher, and then he and his teaching partner, Barbara Crockett, went to the middle school where they taught for a long time. And then Mickey became the girls' basketball coach at Blacksburg High School, and he recently passed away. It was not expected, and the influence that he had in this community for the students that had him and for the young women he coached, if you could just read some of the comments that have come in about him. So you just never know. And we are so blessed in this county to have coaches and teachers and all the folks we have that work with our young people. It makes such a valuable impact on their lives. And I want to thank the Roanoke Times for putting the article about Mr. McGuigan in the newspaper. I know that was, it really meant a lot to the family. And so I just wanted to bring his name forward because he was an invaluable citizen of Montgomery County. And that's all I have.
Very good. Well, I enjoyed VACO Lobby Day too. It was great to meet with our state legislators and advocate on behalf of Montgomery County and spending time with you all. So I enjoyed that. And just to follow up on your comments, Mr. Meadows, is I think there is a consensus for the staff to at least explore, get us some information on what that would look like for if we. I think the consensus would be, moving forward on resource officers, that it would be deputies that we would do and not a reimbursement.
I think I'm concerned about, we've got the town of Christiansburg's opinion, but we don't have the town of Blacksburg's opinion.
Excellent.
So I would be concerned about going too far down that road because they might find value in having their town police officers in their town schools.
Excellent point.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. And part of the options, too, that you might look at, I don't know, in other places that actually the school system employs the SROs, even if they might be sheriff's deputies. So there are lots of different things that you could look at.
And I think as we look at a presentation, if you will, in the budget, it would be to explore, and here are some figures. And I'll give you a preview. I've heard several board members mention the thoughts about changing from a 4-year assessment to an every other year or more frequently. You know, the budget director brought up a concern about that tonight, but as I've shared with him and with Angie as well, we should have a discussion. So in the budget, I'm going to talk about, we need to have a discussion. The budget is about revenues and expenditures, but it's also about direction and policy. So we'll definitely be talking about that too.
Absolutely. I just wanted to ask too, like, in looking at this whole SRO situation again, I just think it's critical that, you know, there's connection made with the two towns and the law enforcement and the county school system, because all of us together, you know, need to be involved in this.
Collaboration, absolutely. And also our citizens and parents to know what that's going to look like. This is a new venture, but I think it will be a positive opportunity for us to outreach to our youngest citizens in the school. With that being said, we stand adjourned. Thank you.